Well, hey everybody. Welcome to Drew the Catholic. We are in Ohio, and we're outside actually because there was nowhere inside that we felt inspired by as a film location necessarily. So it's been a nice day. This is some of the nicest days I've ever had in Ohio, and it's still February. That's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Usually I'm here and it's stormy and gross and dark, but today I'm like, this is pretty good. So let's shoot outside.
You've seen the sun 3 days in a row now.
Yeah, and then
That's
I
a
leave
record.
tomorrow. I've been here 3 days. It's been sunny 3 days. I'm
Not
gonna
going to
go
push your luck.
It's probably gonna snow as soon as I land tomorrow back in Colorado. So, anyways, today we have kind of a special episode. We have Joshua on the show. We also have my wife Gina, who you've seen before, and we're just gonna kind of talk about Catholicism and reversion. I guess in your case, you're a Catholic revert. So,
I actually have not known that term, or that's the proper term.
Oh, sure.
I kept using reverted.
sure.
But I guess
Well, you
that's
reverted.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
That's the tense of talking about it, I guess. But yeah, you are a revert.
but
as in-
I now know there's a proper term.
Yeah.
for
Yeah,
it.
but you
Sure,
didn't know
Reversion.
until like someone used it and you were like,
Yeah.
what are you saying?
Like, what is
yeah.
this?
What does that mean? Yeah.
Or
Wow.
no, it was one of those things where it's like, oh, okay, that's what I should say.
Yeah.
And
I'm a revert, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
You're slowly picking up the language, right?
There's so much
is a
lingo.
There is a lot of
That's a-
lingo. That's like one of the daunting things I think about conversion or reversion, but it's also like one of the cool things because once you pick it up, you're like, oh yeah, I know the stuff to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. And then you guys knew each other in college.
We did. Yeah.
So
So,
you guys
we
were
met in
friends.
college and have been good friends since then, even though we've lived apart for a long time. This is
Yeah.
the first time we've seen each other in several years.
No.
It's
It's
crazy.
been great.
Yeah. So
though.
what was that? What did we determine? Like 3 years ago that we last saw each other.
Yeah.
We talk on the phone, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we started talking on the phone a lot more since you've kind of been on this journey.
Well, even like a couple of years ago, we were kind of, before you guys were even Catholic,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
we were
talked
kind of
then.
going through our own separate, but kind of the same faith
Yeah.
crisis together.
Yeah.
Crisis. Yeah.
Yeah.
that's a good way
It
to
can
put
feel like a crisis
It can.
when you
Yeah.
when you kind of have these moments where you say, "Do I believe what I've been believing?"
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so let's kind of walk through that. So you obviously we are converts. So you and I never grew up Catholic, but you actually did.
I had the
Grow up-
luxury.
Yeah, you had the luxury of you were inside before you were out. So tell us about that. What was that like growing up as a Catholic? What was your experience there?
Yeah, so I'm the firstborn of 4 children. So I kind of got thrown into just the Catholic way.
Sure.
Mhm.
Being the first of my both Catholic parents.
Mhm.
My dad's whole side is Polish. So,
Oh yeah, very
um,
strong Catholic roots.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
my mother's side is majority Irish.
Mhm.
Also strong,
So very Catholic.
very strong vocal Catholic roots. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just learned just whether you're cultural Catholic or not, I think those roots really kind of made my family want to raise me in the church. So
Right.
Yeah.
So were you baptized as an infant then, or?
yes,
Okay.
and I went to PSR.
What is
I-
that?
I always forget the acronym. I really do.
Something like a confirmation class?
It's like weekly, like nightly.
Oh, okay.
Schooling.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's like
I
some
went to
sort of
I went to
catechism
public school.
Oh, okay.
And so we would go every Tuesday night to PSR, and I hated it. It was such a because you went to school all day,
And then it's just
and
more
then
school.
you had to go to church school at night,
Mm.
and nothing really like. I don't know if it clicked for me. I always knew it was important.
Mhm.
Like I remember my mother telling me when I got my first communion, I would have been like 7.
Yeah, 6 or 7.
She said I said I feel God in me when I took my first.
Oh, that's really sweet.
yeah.
Mhm.
And so coming back, having those memories
Mhm.
has been, it's meant more.
Yeah, because
Hearing some
then
stuff like that.
remembering that, you're like, oh, I guess it did mean more to me than I thought,
Mhm.
like this many years later.
Or even when I made my confirmation,
Yeah.
Hmm. Which you
it
were.
felt really important.
How old were you when you? So you did go through
yeah,
confirmation,
16.
16, and you probably had to do like more boring night classes for
Yeah.
that. I'm guessing.
Mhm.
That seems to be a theme I've found. There's a lot of people I think
Mhm.
our age or even older whose experience of Catholicism was that kind of like a stuffy, boring classroom,
Mhm.
and that's maybe for some reason why they didn't attach to it necessarily.
Mhm.
But so would you say that you were obviously having some sort of decent spiritual experience, it sounds like, growing up, but maybe were you not catechized, or you just didn't understand what you believed, or what was sort of the
like, rub.
experience you were having there? Yeah.
I don't know if it ever. I knew it was something important to do,
Mm-hmm.
but it never felt like it was mine, or I
Sure.
didn't fully understand like the depth.
Yeah.
It felt very surface level. I really didn't like it at all.
Okay.
Mm.
When I made my confirmation at 16, I thought I was graduating.
Like,
We're gonna be done with
yes.
this? Yeah.
Yes. I was like, okay, we finally finished, and that was like a bookend. But it's like the start of being a part
It's
of
supposed to be the
church.
beginning. Yeah. Yeah. Welcome to
Um,
the rest of your life. Yeah.
yeah, so I was really glad to be done.
Mhm.
And then I had a gap of like 3 years where I didn't really go to church.
Because that would have been like you finishing high school and then until you went to college.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So for a while you weren't going to church at all. You kind of had stale experience, it sounds like.
Yeah, because my family stopped really going on Sundays.
Oh, okay.
We would, like, my younger sisters just didn't even go through confirmation.
Oh, wow. So you're the only one of your siblings to
So my second sister,
be. Okay.
and then my youngest sister actually, on her own volition, wanted to get confirmed.
Oh, okay.
More
Awesome.
recently, right?
Probably in the last like 4 years,
Okay. Yeah.
5 years, but right before she went to college.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
And I
Yes.
guess like you weren't connected enough that anyone was like coming to your family and being like,
Yeah, where are you
guys, like,
What's going on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
it was
Right.
just kind of like just silent. Like no one really paid attention that you guys just weren't coming anymore.
Yeah. I think it was just. I mean, that also has to do with just like maybe our cultural climate. We're so
Yeah.
family. Our nuclear family is what is like our
Mhm.
main support system.
Sure.
Mhm.
I mean, we don't have that much. I mean, our parents do influence, like our relatives influence, but the nuclear family really is taking over.
Yeah, the multi-generational aspect of our families is kind of lessened, I think, in importance.
Mm-hmm.
And people maybe don't have as much, like, I feel like our parents might have felt the weight to, like, continue going to church because grandma did. I feel like our generation's like, whatever.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
if grandma went to church, I'm not going to go. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
If you don't feel a personal connection to it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel like just the influence of, like, family legacy is definitely not as strong. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
And even within like the body of believers, a lot of times too, you find people that are around your same age, like in the same stages of life, but there's not always a lot of connection like between the older and younger generations, which is definitely something we need.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I think that mentorship is huge, right? Like,
Mhm.
having older people that have kind of ran their race and someone to look up to and see, like, oh, they lived their crazy years as Catholics or whatever, you know.
Yeah, so if you didn't have any of that mentorship from like extended family or from church family,
Mhm.
who's going to check on you, I guess. Yeah.
Which is something I really liked about our college ministry experience.
Yeah, so speak to that, because so you had this period where you weren't really going to church. You felt like you had graduated from it. And then what drew you to what you found in college? And tell us about that journey, because I mean, something led you to that. And was there did you feel like you were missing something, or you needed God, or how did you come to the college ministry experience?
Yeah, that was a journey. Going into college, I started in like musical theater, or just like the theater realm, trying to be musical theater. And it's a crazy world. Like nothing against it. I love the people in it. You just have to have really thick skin, and a lot's going on when it comes just like drugs, sex, drinking. It's a really big party scene, and maybe that's just college in general.
Sure.
Yeah.
I could see
I
how
guess
like
that's where I
the
found it.
musical theater crowd, though, being really artistic would be especially like expressive in that sense.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember being like 2 semesters in, going into my 3rd semester of freshman year of college, and seeing seniors and living this lifestyle for like almost 3 semesters, and being like, how have they survived 8 semesters
Right.
of this?
Yeah.
Right.
like, how are they not dead?
How are you not just exhausted?
Exhausted. I was
like
feeling
just drinking
exhausted.
every weekend and
Mhm. Just like living that type of busy life in kind of in my spring semester of freshman year is when God just started putting Christians in my life in like every aspect of my college day.
Mm-hmm.
So the clubs I was running, my classes, sports I was playing on campus, all ended up being people that were related to this campus ministry.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
So I just started getting closer with them, and God really revealed himself through like what true friendship should look like. Compared, not that any of my friends that I had before were bad. There's just this depth that was kind of taking me with these new friends.
Yeah.
That like was just like surprising to me, something different than I've even experienced my entire life.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, just to find people who actually kind of care about you.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that just led to joining that ministry, kind of getting more curious about like what faith even is.
Mm-hmm.
So we would learn gospel illustrations,
Mm-hmm.
and we went on a spring break trip, and someone spun that gospel illustration back at me, even though I was trained to present that to other people. I was just like living in no man's land really when it came to my faith. I just really appreciated the friendship that was being offered to me. And that's kind of when that illustration got flipped back at me, that when the person that was giving or talking to me said, God's been pursuing me my whole life. And that just like struck a chord with me.
Right.
And like has been that close to me and wants to know you and have a personal relationship. So that's where I'm really thankful for that ministry. It really taught me how to have a personal relationship with Christ.
Yeah.
Because that's what they were extending to me.
Right. Well, as I say, it started with friendship, which I feel like is a really pivotal thing in our age and day. Like I think it's going to get more and more necessary as time goes on and as secular culture kind of continues to increase. People are just not connected. You know, like we were just saying with multi-generational families, they're not even connected to their neighbors. They might not have people who understand them or just like them for who they are, or are involved in the depths of their life to run through life with. And I mean, you were going to this ministry for a bit, it seems like, without even knowing where you were faith-wise, but you were just showing up because of the friendship. So I think it speaks to the testament of like, we probably can't evangelize anybody if we're not willing to be friends with them, you know, to befriend them, which starts before they've necessarily converted or made a faith commitment or changed their lifestyle at all.
Yeah, it's really all about love.
Yeah.
And I think so I became a really big part of that ministry. We were asked to be leaders going in our sophomore year. And that kind of just like took over.
So you guys were hanging out at this point, right?
We had met a little bit. I think we didn't really.
Did we meet freshman year? I don't think so.
I don't know, probably not. But I remember like hearing about your spring break trip because I wasn't on it. And I think it's really funny because it was an evangelism trip, but you didn't really know what that meant.
No.
Like you didn't know what was going to be asked of you.
You're like, I'm just going to go on a vacation, man.
Yeah, I thought I was going to Florida.
Right, yeah. And you get there and they're like, okay, go into this mall, share this illustration with people, and let's hope that like a lot of people get saved.
Yeah.
You know, that's the language, right?
What kind of vacation is this?
Well, and then I got saved on the trip.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Tell us about that because I think you used to talk about that as your point of conversion, right? Do you still view it that, or like how did that develop?
Yeah. I mean, I guess knowing some of what I know now, I'm still like very new into the Catholic Church in the sense of learning.
Sure.
Yeah.
My logical brain making sense of everything.
Yeah.
Right.
So I guess like, that's personally is when I made a commitment
Sure.
to like really take it serious or like kind of investigate it more. Was that trip?
Yeah.
I guess I don't even know how theologically I would explain
define it. Yeah.
what happened there.
Well, whatever happened, you had some sort of personal encounter with Jesus. You know, like the efficaciousness of your baptism and confirmation is what it is. But that's when you took up what God had maybe already done in your life, in a sense. It sounds like, you know. I mean, in Protestantism, it's like that's when I came to Christ, got saved, whole thing is done. Whereas in Catholicism, it's like there's all this grace that's given to you, but then at some point you have to choose to cooperate with it,
Yeah.
right? And I think everyone kind of has those moments of conversion.
Yeah, I just like adopted the lingo
Yeah.
of the Protestant world
Yeah.
in that moment of like I was saved.
Yeah.
And so I
Did
guess
you
I've
also
never
get-
reframed it.
And you got rebaptized at that point, right?
I also got rebaptized.
Because you thought
Okay,
like,
sure.
oh, okay, like I'm personally committing to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because the
In the Gulf of
tradition we were in, the tradition we were in associated like personal conversion with baptism
Yeah.
as opposed to like, because they would have considered like, oh, well, when you were a baby, you couldn't make that decision, so that's not a valid baptism. So you were like, okay, well, I'll get baptized. Sure.
Well, then I learned what actually happens during baptism, and I was like furious. not in the sense that I got rebaptized, but in the sense of like, oh, like this is truly what the church believes that baptism is, and it's like the gift of the Holy Spirit is given to you in that moment,
Right.
which is a beautiful thing.
That is beautiful, yeah.
And like, why wouldn't we want to get that
Right.
as soon as
possible? Yeah,
Right.
totally.
Right.
So
Double dunked.
yeah, I was too. I also
Okay,
also got rebaptized around the same time, but
I didn't, but I probably needed it. I probably could have benefited from.
Another touch point.
Someone's gonna take that seriously in the comments. That's a joke.
yeah, no.
Well, and that's funny. I had to learn what the definition of evangelism was. And once I found out that definition, I tried to get out of going on the trip.
Yeah.
And I was told like I can just go out and pass water out to people, and that's not what happened.
You ended up, hey man, here's this thing that you should believe. I don't know if I believe it, but like you should definitely believe it. That's funny. That's funny. Wow. So you had sort of a moment of conversion, and so coming home from that, what was your experience like? Like you're kind of getting more involved in this campus ministry. Now, would you have identified as a Christian at that point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And what did that change?
When did that change?
What did that change?
Oh, so I knew I wanted to leave the theater world and pursue another major.
Okay.
And that kind of led into I changed my major every fall, not really knowing what I wanted to do. But what was constant throughout that was being on student staff
Yeah.
with that ministry. And so I really thought from sophomore year, because of that just like turned my whole world around.
Yeah.
Wanting to follow Jesus. And it's like once lights are on, it's hard to go back to the dark. And I just started seeing the world as like our lives is just like ministry. And I wanted to do that. So I really thought I was going to go on staff and be on staff with that ministry for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And so I actually did go on staff after college for a couple of years. So it really made a huge impact on me. We would do like weekly meetings, we'd hold events, and a lot of the staff on our campus of that ministry really tried to empower students.
Yeah.
Which I think was good.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. It taught me so much about leadership and mentorship, discipleship. And so I'm really there's so many skills from that time in my life, and even going on staff with that ministry, that I'm so thankful for. Like I would never want to like wipe that out, even though it was Protestant.
Yeah. What do you feel like was different about your experience or like some of the skills you picked up through the college ministry that maybe you didn't receive or fully realize in like your Catholic education growing up?
Yeah, I think that's a hard question in the sense of, was I ready to like learn that kind of stuff?
Right.
Because I was just younger.
Yeah, because it might not have been that like maybe your parish didn't really suck. Maybe it was just that you weren't like ready
for
to
it.
plug in. Maybe your parish did suck. You know, that happens a lot too, and then it would have missed for that reason. But that's interesting.
Because I also had a minor in philosophy.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know
So I'm really logically driven. So figuring out theology was really fun for me in college. I think that's something that we both.
Yeah, we'd be like, oh, look at the cool thing I learned or figured out today.
Yeah.
What sort of like theological influences you guys have in college? I mean, obviously this ministry has their own
Tim Keller.
content. Tim Keller, Timmy K.
That's
That's
true.
funny. Rick and I were talking about him in our
Yeah.
interview.
I listened
He's
to
a
so
good
many
one.
of his
Yeah,
projects, like so many of his speeches,
Yeah, sermons.
sermons.
Sermons,
Speeches.
speeches. We're Catholic now. We can't. They're just speeches.
Also, I'm sorry, I'm so shivery.
Oh,
I
you're
feel
good. Are you cold?
I'm-
Do we need
yeah,
to- do I
on
need to
the-
get
Do you
you a
want a
thicker
blanket?
jacket?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
I think I'm just like realizing that like I have Cincinnati blood now.
Yeah.
Oh,
I just
yeah.
Now
moved
that-
up here a couple of weeks ago, so
Sure.
I'm like, Cleveland?
52
Meanwhile,
degrees. I can't.
we're
Nice
coming
to
from
meet you.
Colorado, where I'm like, oh, the sun is
Yeah.
out. It's 52 whole degrees. Let's go.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. So Timmy K was big. Were you guys? Did you do a lot of like John Piper stuff as well? A little bit of that type of
I
stuff.
never really like flocked to him.
Okay, I wasn't
I
in the
think
same ministry. But
Yeah,
we had
I
similar
mean,
influences
certain
as well.
people here and there were really into John Piper, which once I was able to stop listening to him, I was so happy.
What do you mean?
Oh, just some of his theology that I think is just really damaging. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, they're
and-
really big into the imputation
Yeah.
view of justification. Like he thinks so. John Piper's camp would equate that with the gospel. Like they would say, if you don't believe in imputed righteousness as justification, you don't believe in the
Mhm.
true biblical gospel.
and explain what that is real quick.
So like imputed righteousness being like God takes Jesus's righteousness and covers you with it, but there's not necessarily a change within you underneath, because they would say that for you to change would be works, like necessary works. So Martin Luther literally used the illustration of your dung covered in snow, and the snow is the righteousness of Christ. So God sees you as righteous as Christ is, but you might not be actually righteous
Because he's seeing the snow, not
because he's
your
seeing the
dung.
snow and not the dung underneath.
Okay.
Right.
Even though he's God, he can't see the poop pile underneath you.
Oh man. Yeah, so I had a professor in college who did point out, he's like, that kind of relies on legal fiction. Like God is using a legal fiction to not damn us, is kind of what that view equates itself to.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, that would be a strong view of it. Like, there's people who hold a penal substitution view that would be more nuanced and maybe more palatable. But I think to some degree that's, yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
was
I
fully
just
in
started
that
learning about penal substitutionary atonement. I like
Yeah.
just saying the whole thing. It's funny.
Yeah, yeah.
What's
PST
it?
or
P-
wait, PSA.
PSA.
I guess it would
Oh,
be.
PSA.
I can't spell.
PST.
And it's something I didn't know that I believed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the sense of
okay.
like I didn't know that that's what I was choosing to
Yeah.
believe.
Right.
And how much.
Were you guys taught that in the ministry you're in? Was that
Never
pretty-
in those
Not.
terms.
Yeah. No one ever used that word, but that is.
But
what,
they use that framework.
Yes.
Yeah.
Probably. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, because now I've been to like not mass. I've been
Protestant
like
church.
yeah Protestant church. I
Whatever
like
they
can't
call
remember
that.
any of the terms
The
anymore. I just don't have to
church,
call
the
anything
worship
anymore.
service.
Yeah. And I've noticed that like almost all worship songs are like drenched in penal substitutionary
Yeah.
atonement.
Absolutely.
And it's crazy. And I
Yeah.
was having this experience where I was singing a song that I knew. And I'm like, I don't know if I believe what I'm singing right now.
Mhm.
And I stopped singing. And then while the pastor was having his sermon, I'm just like on my phone looking up penal substitutionary atonement because it was just like, I didn't know how to call it that. But I just
Right.
like, as I was singing, I was like, I don't know if I believe that.
Right.
Yeah.
So this
So,
is
like,
recent. What you're
Yeah,
talking
this is
about.
recent.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so I kind of felt rude
Yeah.
in church just being on my phone. But I was like, I'm doing religious things.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not really listening to anything he's telling me.
Yeah.
Sure.
But I was just so like caught off guard about this,
Hmm.
about that kind of idea, and then looking that up, it's like,
Mhm.
oh, okay, that's what penal substitutionary atonement's called.
Well, and it
Yeah.
really does.
Yes.
Like, so, like, a lot of Catholics. Ooh, this is gonna get me in trouble. A lot of people will argue with Protestants who say Catholics believe in a different gospel, and usually it's that camp that's like Catholicism. Rome preaches a different gospel. You know, like you'll hear that from like John Piper, John MacArthur all the time.
Mhm.
But when I look at that really stringent form of penal substitutionary atonement, and then I look at Catholic theology, I'm like, yeah, I agree with you. We believe a different thing about one of the most central things to Jesus's life and how it redeems us.
And
and
that's such a big deal.
It's a huge deal, yeah. Well, and it is one of the things the Reformers broke over, was they came up with the formula of imputed righteousness, and they read it into the Bible, they read it into the Fathers even, some of the Fathers. But like when you look at the Fathers, there's this idea that God's wrath needs to be satisfied. I mean, there's passages in the Bible that talk like that, but what they mean by that is like God is bloodthirsty for vengeance, really. And for him to be okay with us, he has to exact that on somebody. And we couldn't bear the weight of it, so Jesus has to, which becomes like divine child abuse in a way, That's like that, and that's one of the way atheists argue against Christianity. Is they're like, well, why would you worship a God who wants to abuse his son in order to be okay with you?
And it's also not justice either.
Right. It's like, legal fiction.
Yeah.
Whereas the view of the atonement that I mean, I think the Bible clearly preaches, and Catholicism being biblical preaches. I'm just going full bore, I guess.
No, it's okay.
No contest here, I guess. But John 3:16 is not God so hated the world that he had to destroy his only son. It's that God so loved the world that he sent his one and only son so that anyone who comes to him might have life, and like the cross is supposed to be, like if Jesus is the image of the Father, the cross is a perfect depiction of the way in which God loves us and God makes covenant with us, because if you think about like going all the way back to Abraham, when Abraham splits the animals, who goes through the animals?
God.
It's God. And it's not, Abraham, I'm going to destroy you and all of your kin. It's, I'm going to be the one destroyed. And the son literally is. He's literally killed, And then there's all the Trinitarian problems, right? Like because a lot of those same camps, like, did you guys ever hear the whole thing, like God turned his face away from Jesus? There's that whole belief, and it's like, if God is a Trinity and the Father and the Son are consubstantial, like they're of the same divine substance, and the Father's turning his face from the Son, you have two problems. Either the Trinity split at that moment, or the divinity of Jesus split from the humanity of Jesus. And if that happens, then we don't have a Savior, because that would leave our humanity damned. You know what I mean?
Well, that's even a worship song. The Father turned his face away.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I remember like early 2000s being like, the Father, singing that, oh God, turning his face away from Jesus. How great for us,
Right.
Well, and I had this argument with my therapist, of all people, because she was a Baptist, and we had this huge argument that we were like inherently good, whether we're inherently good or inherently evil.
What did she say?
That we're inherently evil.
Wow. Yeah.
Not basically the pile of dung.
Yeah, total depravity would be the Calvinist sort of Reformed doctrine that like we're utterly depraved. There's no goodness within us. Whereas like Catholics would teach we are of our own efforts unable to fix the damage done by original sin. So we are irreparably damaged beyond divine intervention from original sin, but that is like a disease that needs to be healed. It doesn't destroy our underlying value as the Imago Dei, And a lot of theologians would say, like, when in Genesis it says we were made in the image and likeness of God, they would say that with original sin, we no longer operate in the likeness of God, but we still retain the image of God. And so the image leads to the likeness if you're in communion with God. But when you enter into covenant with sin, which is what original sin is, now we're bound to the world, the devil, and death. We no longer are operating in the likeness of God. And so, but we never lose the image, right? Like imagine looking at all the people, like going to the beach and like looking at all the people and be like, all of you depraved, wicked wretches, horrible scoundrels that God ought to damn and destroy. Or
but it almost tracks though. If you have to believe that we need something we need Jesus to die, so that we
like
can
God
be
has
looked
to destroy somebody.
as good.
Right.
So it's like if you believe in the PSA, you have to almost
PSA
believe
with
that
our
you
PSLs.
are. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Right.
You have to believe that you're inherently bad, because that like what.
Well, and then how does that change how you interact with people?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, whereas
that's where arrogance comes in.
Absolutely, and it's so much more beautiful. And I found myself doing this a lot more because, like, even as a Protestant, I'd have these moments where I'm like, I know biblically God is love and God loves people. I feel like as a Catholic, I'm like, I actually can, like, look at someone in, like, a really depraved situation and be like, you're a beautiful creature still. And God isn't, like, violently angry at you. He's deeply pitiful towards you. Like, he so yearns to clean you and make you into what he's designed you to be. You know, like when someone's like hopelessly addicted to drugs and they're living on the streets and their whole life is wretched and dirty, but they're still in the image of God, and like the reality of that dignified position demands that they be treated well and that they be loved and that there be like this outpouring of compassion that we would associate with someone like Mother Teresa, because that person is made to be an icon. That's what the Greek word would have been. Like the Septuagint could call you an icon of God, an image of God. And that's way different than, it's so negative. When you're out of it, you're like, man, no wonder I used to hate myself.
Doing like evangelism where we'd have to do like outward.
You know that God hates you?
Yeah.
Well, it's like, for the wages of sin is death and the free gift of God is eternal. Like,
right. Yeah.
it can be really hard to be on the receiving end of that instead of, like, my whole view of evangelism has changed drastically.
Right.
And I think it was even changing within the context of being on staff with the ministry. Because when I went on staff, I actually got in trouble. I got like talked to because I wasn't meeting with enough people a week, and or like getting like collecting enough people.
Yeah.
And I really pushed up against that because it's like I'm living life with this one guy. And to live life with someone, you have to do things together. It's not just like, let's meet up once a week and read the Bible, and then I'll see you again next week at that time.
Yeah.
That's not friendship.
Yeah, and it can't really start with that.
Yeah.
As we said earlier, it kind of has to have that underlying level of friendship and trust built first.
Right.
For like you to take each other seriously, or want this other person to speak in your life.
Or to trust them even,
Yeah.
But they're even saying like good and true things that will be helpful for you. And so that was really hard to do that with so many people. It's like I saw through it, they saw through it if we were just meeting once a week to read the Bible.
It wasn't genuine.
It didn't feel genuine, and it's like neither of us want to be here. What are we really doing this for?
Yeah.
Right.
So but in the Catholic Church, it's more because God is so centered around love. It allows me to see everyone on this like equal playing ground, no matter where their circumstance lies, or who they are, where they came from.
Yeah, that doesn't mean we leave them there, but but you can approach them with this dignity. Yeah. And that's not to say that there's not Protestant circles that don't believe that, but it seems like we all kind of came from one that was like, they're pretty much garbage.
Well, it's just like it's so you're on like a fence post. You can either fall like, oh, I can find my compassion and love for this person, or you like lean to the other way where it's like, oh, they might be going to hell. I'm better than them.
Yeah, which that can be a temptation for anyone. But yeah, it's just an unhealthy view in some ways.
And I feel like when you were evangelizing someone in that world, it was kind of like, you got to get them to see how bad off they are so that then they really need God.
Yeah.
Whereas like, I think the Catholic approach is more like, let's introduce people to everything that they're made for. And like, get them to long to return to that.
Yeah. And like partake in it.
Yeah.
And really understand what they're doing and how beautiful it can be.
Yeah.
Right.
And maybe I'm like jumping the gun, but it's like, I think I've seen in the course of my life, I look back, it's just this longing for depth. And where am I finding that depth? So I didn't really get that 0 to 16 in the Catholic Church. I got some of that going to the Catholic ministry, the Christian ministry in college. And then it kind of fiddled out, right? Like I felt like I couldn't get deeper anywhere. And then I feel like the Catholic Church offered that depth again.
Yeah, so tell us like about those years, either like while you were on staff or as you were kind of phasing out of staff, like what was happening in your spiritual life during that time? Because like what got you from like on fire, learning all these disciplines, really studying the Bible a lot, and then kind of what happened going forward?
Yeah. Well, so after going on staff with that ministry, I did that for a couple years outside of college, and then I went on staff with a church, where I was living, running a cafe for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you were a really good barista.
Thank you.
I remember getting a latte from you. I was like, pretty good latte art, pretty good latte.
Coming from a fellow
I'm
barista here.
Fellow barista, fellow snob,
Okay.
respect.
For some reason, I don't remember making you a latte.
I think it was when we visited. You had some friends in the same ministry in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
When we first came to Ohio, you took me on this like grand tour to meet all
Yeah.
your people. And I
Yep.
think we were in Cincinnati for a couple days. And
Okay.
Yeah.
you were like mid-shift craziness.
Mm-hmm.
So it was in passing.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah, I
But
loved that time.
it was good. It was a latte worth
you.
remembering. So
Yes. So, okay.
Yeah.
So you're running this cafe, working at
Yeah.
this church.
And the first year I was just managing the cafe, but then I asked to be on church staff and like get a salary from the church
Yeah.
to really run that cafe as a ministry branch from that church. Like
Yeah.
it had started.
Mhm.
It was an 18-year-old cafe.
oh wow.
And cafes aren't that old.
So it wasn't just like the coffee bar that you see in some churches when you come
No.
in. It's like, grab a cup of coffee and enjoy Jesus with us.
Well, it started as like a once a month thing in their basement.
Okay.
And then over the course of the years, it became like a $500,000 business.
Wow.
And like God really blessed
We
that.
keep saying the same thing at the same time.
Um,
That's awesome.
so it was really, I felt such a high honor to kind of take that over
Mhm.
and have all these amazing people who had ran it before me.
Mhm.
But it was a non-denominational church, and that's the first time I've ever been on like a local body church staff.
Sure.
Yeah.
I worked with a ministry, but that ministry is considered a parachurch,
Right.
which like I don't know how well the parachurch model really works.
There's still lots to unpack there. Yeah.
That's a whole different rabbit
yeah,
hole.
yeah.
But being on that church staff, you see so much of the behind the scenes stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that year we had lost a bunch of pastoral leadership. Yep. From circumstance, or we were just going through a lot as a community.
Yeah.
And had to like go through a rebuilding stage.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of messiness.
Yeah.
Trying to refigure it out because there's no structure. There's obviously the structure. I don't want to talk that poorly about
Sure.
like a Protestant church, but what's so beautiful about the Catholic Church is that the whole apostolic succession,
Right.
very clear
You know who's
structure
in charge when you
of
go to
who's
the
in
church.
charge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case when it comes to a non-denominational church. You have like the what's it called? Not the elders.
There's usually like the board of
Lead
elders.
team.
Yeah. And then there's like the executive pastor and then the lead teaching pastor.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like your president and then your finance director, almost like if it was a business, like CEO and CFO.
Yeah.
And then you'll have like your youth pastors, kind of like the CEO in training, usually. Unfortunately, sorry, youth pastors.
Yeah.
Worship pastors, like the guy that's like too cool to be the teaching pastor,
They can play guitar.
but can play guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just we had lost our head pastor and our associate pastor within the same 2 weeks.
Oh wow.
And so everything fell on like our lead team to restructure.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up bringing another source to help us plan out structure, which was such a strange experience because they like have all these different ways we can kind of lead a church, one that's more congregation centered, one that's more lead team and pastoral led or driven.
Yeah, it's like choose your own adventure for
Yeah.
church. Yeah.
And I'm like, what? I just saw like a whole nother side of things.
So is that almost like a consulting group?
It was a
type?
consulting
like a church
group.
consulting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I didn't even know
So
they had
there's-
that.
Yeah, I didn't know either.
Huh.
And they were really great. I'm not like love
Sure.
the people.
Sure.
But it was strange to look at church of like these 7 different ways we can run it on this.
And was there any discussion of like the theology of those as being biblical or not, or was that a
think-
discussion, or was it just kind of like, yeah, here's...
All of this is biblical.
Okay,
You can choose which one you
wow,
want to do.
interesting.
Huh.
Yeah.
so we had like meetings for the congregation to attend to see which way we wanted to go. But I just saw this lack of a path, right? And it just kind of led me to have some concerns. And at that point, before even all that happened, I was starting to feel like, what is the point of church? If we're coming here every Sunday, I'm having the same conversations with the same people about, how was your day? What are you doing this week? Oh, cool. And we have no interactions outside of that.
Right.
And church in the Protestant world is supposed to be this like community that you come to every Sunday and really get to develop that. And I had been at that church for 5 years and not had anyone mentor me.
Yeah.
And
And
you were on staff.
And I was on staff.
Wow.
I even felt like I wasn't even known that well from the congregation.
Sure.
So just seeing all that messiness and seeing if a congregation member complained enough or enough of people in the we would change how we did church.
Right.
That was just a big red flag for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like there has to be a way that's happening somewhere. We have to really hone in on what the point of church is so that we know what we're showing up for and know what we're getting out of that Sunday. And with like the Catholic Church, we have a mission that day, and that's to receive Christ through the Eucharist. And that's what that day is built around.
Yeah.
And it's almost everyone knows that that's what they're going there for. And community gets built in different ways.
Yeah.
But that's the point
unifying
of
thing.
the unifying thing.
Yeah.
Where I kind of saw it. We were trying to catch all of that on a Sunday morning. And figuring out how we're going to run the next Sunday morning based on the previous Sunday morning and what worked, what didn't. And it puts so much stress on pastors, on pastoral staff. And that just becomes difficult to see what the unifying purpose is.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, I think
that's good.
I think you did. What about in your personal life though? Because you had mentioned earlier, like you kind of felt like you got to a point where stuff kind of like fizzled out, and you felt like there wasn't a lot of depth available to you in like your spiritual growth. So what was happening in kind of like your personal life, your like personal like prayer or Bible time that was changing?
Yeah, so a lot of my personal... There's a cat.
Hello, cat.
I'm highly allergic to cats, but I'm fine outside.
She probably won't come over here. I'm also allergic, so
Oh, really?
yeah.
Is that a house cat?
She only lives outside. She doesn't come in.
Okay. When did you adopt her?
Oh, we've had her for like...
You guys have had it for a long time.
Yeah, since I was in high school.
You just put food out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she gets birds. Sorry, I know it's wrong.
The birds.
All
Whatever.
the birds that are killed by house cats every year. But
Is it a problem?
it's a problem, yeah.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, a lot of people don't get upset about that.
Oh, we'll get some
Which-
complaining in the comments then.
I
Wow,
understand
as soon as I
it.
adjust the camera,
seen
the sun comes back out. We had someone complain in the comments a couple videos ago that I mentioned hunting.
Yeah.
And they were like, hunting for sport is wrong. And I'm like, cool, but I said I hunt for food, so. Oh, YouTube.
Yeah.
Never change.
Uh-huh. Anyway, but yeah, so what do you feel like was changing in your personal spiritual life?
Yeah. So being on staff with a ministry and having it be a part of your job to read the Bible
Yeah.
and be so like regimented and structured around it, I had to take like I'm even still like in the backlash of reading my Bible personally.
Yeah.
Because of the toll that kind of took on me. I'm slowly coming out of that.
Sure.
It almost became like something you resented because it was like required for your job. Yeah.
Yeah. That's not how it should be.
Right.
Right.
It should feel like freeing and beautiful.
And it's like food that you can't wait to devour.
Which is totally the Protestant like ethos, right? Like this is the word, this is the bread. Like that's their bread, right? You know, like the word is the bread that we need. Which Jesus does say. But that's kind of their thing. So for that to become stale and regimented, that's what they accuse us of, is having stale and regimented things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. What do you think it was about the approach that made it that way?
Yeah. It's just the extended, almost like homework that you didn't even know you were signing up for. We'd have these Bible studies with like pages and pages of structured study, and it just got exhausting. And that being half of your job and half of your other job being extended out to students and then creating events. And it was just a lot. It just felt so much. And the shame and guilt you'd feel if you didn't finish your Bible study. And maybe I haven't even fully unpacked why it felt.
Just felt restrictive.
Restrictive.
I feel like one thing I noticed when we became Catholic is I was like, oh, before it was really focused on Bible study, like what we were in before. And then I feel like Catholicism is really focused on prayer. And obviously Protestants do both, Catholics do both. But I was like Catholics pray a lot.
And like the difference of the liturgical approach of the church is to make the word flesh within you. You know what I mean? Like the word became flesh. Jesus is the word. He became flesh. And the goal of the liturgy, which almost every word of the Mass and of the Liturgy of the Hours, if you're doing the public prayer of the church, and even the Rosary, even the private devotions, every word comes from Scripture, comes from tradition in some senses. It's all based there, but it's embodied in a really human way. I think that makes a big difference. Like, I know for me it did, because I'm like, I can be really heady. I'm kind of like you in that I'm like logically inclined. And when I was Protestant, and I'm still struggling with this as a Catholic, it's very easy for me to hold a right idea here and not live it out here. But with Catholicism, even like just the act of having to kneel when we say certain words and saying them over and over again, even when I don't feel like them, it actually forms me and puts me in that place. You know what I mean? Whereas before it's like, oh, don't do repetitive prayer because it's meaningless. I'm like, actually, it's forming meaning within me the more I do it, the more I submit myself to it. And I think it takes the word and it makes it flesh in you in a really interesting way.
It felt like it was based off how logically sound I was.
Yeah.
It was how good of a Christian I was.
Yeah, your exegesis determines your worth as a Christian.
Yeah.
Sure.
Great way to say it.
Yeah.
And that can feel really, it feels like it's putting you in a corner.
You can only out Tim Keller.
Yeah, and if you didn't understand what Tim Keller said, and not just Tim Keller, but if you didn't, I think then that's what drove me to be so like, I need to understand these things.
Yeah.
Or the pressure you feel as a mentor or discipler to fully grasp everything.
Yeah.
And have like the next juicy commentary on that verse that people are not very talkative on.
And half my Bible studies were, all the things I said were being pulled from commentaries just to have that like attractive feature of our Bible study.
Yeah.
And that felt kind of bad.
Sure.
You know? And it's okay to take commentary. I'm not saying that that's the case, but I felt like my work depended on being able to say those things. And really being pushed into it without much of my own our own training.
Yeah.
So because you don't have any formal like seminary experience or education, so you're kind of pulling from all these. And there's nothing wrong with like if like in the Protestant world, not being a seminary trained pastor is, I don't know, not necessarily the biggest deal.
Yeah, everyone's pretty comfortable. With that, I guess.
Our church kind of gave a stink of someone that was coming on who didn't have like a degree.
Oh, okay.
So I guess it just depends on where you go.
Yeah. It's different in Catholic world though, because it's like, I mean, you're going to be a priest, so you look like there's not just
a
your
formation
teaching.
process.
Yeah, it's not just that you're teaching. You also have all these other parts of your life that change. Like you can't get married, you're celibate. You have to administer these sacraments, which if you don't get the form right, then the sacrament can be declared invalid. Like there's a lot more weight to it in that sense, you know.
And it's a long process versus like,
it's like
you
7
make
years, man.
like what people are viewing as a personal commitment to Jesus, and like 4 months later they're like, all right, you're ready to be a leader.
Bro.
Like let's
ready.
go.
He's on fire.
Yeah, and it was scary.
Get him in there before the zeal goes out, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
that's
how it is.
funny. Well, I almost became like some poster child for our
Yeah.
ministry
Sure.
because like I went on this trip, and then look what happens when you go on these trips, and then now he's the leader and he's teaching others, and
Sure.
I almost got like lost in the form
Yeah.
of being a success story,
Right.
and that can do something to how you view yourself, or especially as I look back on it. I don't think I felt good in the moment,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're being praised and like,
Yeah, there's accolades. You're like living up to the ideals of your community and
Mhm.
embodying it, and there's like success in that they're putting you in this place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that falls flat a lot of times. I think once you start going through like a dark night of the soul.
yeah.
I know for me that's what kind of happened. Like there were a lot of ministries I was involved in as a Protestant that I was sort of a poster child in some senses as well. And then yeah, it's the same thing looking back. I'm like, man, but whenever there was something dark, I kind of tended to ignore it because I'm like, well, on the outside I have this facade of like, hey, I converted. I'm like, I know my stuff with the Bible, whatever. Like that's the thing. That's my identity in a sense. But like if I'm struggling, well, I can't really show that because then they might take me off this ministry team or something.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and you almost didn't want to show it,
Right.
for those reasons, and wanting to still like feel good about yourself. But we'd almost get these prescriptions of how to do life, and we knew that like having a daily Bible study was important. If you're not doing that, it would get so pressed into you that if you don't do those things, you're a bad Christian, instead of this liturgical forming, which has been really attractive because it becomes something that you really, from your depths, it just like spills out instead of like guilt and shame route.
Yeah.
So what would you say? I mean, you're kind of starting to have some of these experiences. There's a lot of pressure in the ministry. There's some things kind of untangling. But what would you say was like, what was the thing that led you to even being open to Catholicism?
Like again,
Yeah, again.
or reversion.
Reversion, yeah.
Yeah. Like, how did you move on from like the staleness? Like, what happened after that?
Yeah. So I think with not really feeling like I knew the purpose of a Sunday church and not feeling that connection with my community. Our community was close in a sense, but it felt like we were missing something. And then being frustrated with being on a church staff with no direction, and they were put in a bad place. I guess I don't have to keep caveating, but and then we had both gone through a podcast that taught us some more things.
Yeah.
From the Jewish perspective, or was that BEMA?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's BEMA. It's a great podcast, honestly.
It's a great podcast.
It's still good.
Yeah.
Well, then Marty ended up coming to our church.
That's
who's the
right.
leader
That's
of
so
that
weird.
podcast.
Oh, wow.
So I got to meet him, this guy that this podcast that was really forming me. But what the real purpose of that podcast, I think, as I look back on it in that time, was that there's things about the Bible that held like different perspectives that I had previously not known about. And kind of the way we were taught is like, this is it.
Yeah.
Like, so it kind of threw me into this loop of like, oh wait, there's other ways to look at this. There's other cultural perspectives to take in account.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling like angry of like, maybe, can you describe it?
Yeah. So like for people who haven't heard of the podcast, it was basically like meant to reveal some of the like Jewish roots of the biblical text. So like understanding the culture, the language, the customs, and like it shed a light on how all of that revealed like a greater depth to scripture than if like you don't know any of that and you're just reading it off the page with none of that background. And so yeah, I feel like especially it's really great for the first several books of the Bible, like the Torah. I remember like listening to the first episodes on the first chapters of Genesis, and I was like screaming in the car because I was like, how has no one ever told me this?
It's so beautiful. It feels like someone put a key into the Bible and it just opens this treasure chest.
I like the analogy of we're reading a letter that was written from a person to someone's like mom. And unless you know the depth of that relationship or understand the relationship between mother and daughter, you're not going to understand what some of the communication is
Right.
giving off to that mother.
Yeah. So a lot of things I was talking about were like typology, imagery,
Structure of writing.
yeah, stuff like that.
And I feel like Marty did a really good job of diving into the deeper rabbinical literature, and that's becoming a bigger fad I've noticed in evangelicalism. So like in my own journey, I had the same introduction through N.T. Wright, who's like more of the academic kind of end of that, but his whole project was to re-Judaize the New Testament, specifically St. Paul, and he's an Anglican guy, but there's sort of this whole wave of evangelicals doing that, and it's weird because it's starting to link up with what they call the new perspective on Paul, which is now going to the whole New Testament of how do we look at this in the context of first century Judaism, which means going to the Talmud and to the rabbinical text and looking at what the Essenes were doing in the days of Christ, because then you find there's all sorts of ideas about the Messiah that weren't just the political warmongering Messiah that Jesus feeds into exactly. You find there's all sorts of traditions around the Passover and things like that. That's also mixing with this whole like Dallas Willard, Richard Foster, reintroducing historic Christian disciplines, and you're finding these denominations starting to like
Find that stuff attractive.
Yeah. Like there's a lot of churches that I was really involved with the stuff their pastors were putting out who were returning to observing the Sabbath, like the Saturday Sabbath, which is interesting, and then doing communion every week and having the form from 1 Corinthians 11 in there, where it's like this is my body broken for you, and starting to return to like saying like the Apostles' Creed and stuff, just because there's like they're kind of reclaiming some of those really Catholic traditions, but for them they're like, oh well, Christians have always done this, so we should start doing them again.
And I just said attractive, but it's not even just attractive, but how important it is to hold that tradition, because so much can get lost if we don't, or even just that when it came to what's the text that the Mishpat?
Oh, the Mishnah.
No, like is that
The
it?
mishpat, I think, are like the individual teachings, right?
Yeah.
Is it? What's that secondary book?
Talmud.
Is it Talmud?
The Talmud. Yeah, so there's the Torah is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The Tanakh is the entirety of the Old Testament, and the Talmud was the rabbinical commentary on it.
Okay, yeah.
And then
The
their
Talmud,
Mishpat was their individual rabbis teaching on a passage.
Okay, yeah. So like that stuff, I think that is the first time it was introduced to me that like stuff that's not just biblical text can be important to give us certain perspectives and learnings and teachings.
Yeah, it like unveiled the value of oral tradition, really, because it's like if you're only sticking to that biblical text, you're not going to know any of that.
And you felt I felt no freedom to stray away from the text.
Yeah.
Anything outside of that, it's not actually God breathed.
Sure.
Even though we're using all of these commentaries to inform our reading of the text.
Yes.
Well, John Piper is as close as you can get to God breathed, Gina. So, well, it's fun. That always cracks me up too, because like when I had discussions with people, I'm like, I understand the desire to be stringent people of the book in terms of not straying and adding something, because there's like the fear of like, well, we don't want to become like Israel and like go after false gods, but Israel completely left for another tradition, first off, but then second off, like if the text is all you have, then you don't even have the books that the text should be compiled by in the text. So how do you know what books? And then at some point you're going to hit a block in the road where you're like, this passage makes no sense, and the natural instinct of the lived experience of every Protestant I'd ever met, including me when I was a Protestant, was to go ask their pastor what it meant, or to appeal to a commentary. So there's almost like this anthropological need for an authority and a source of tradition to kind of keep us in, it's kind of like having the barriers in bowling. Like you need someone to help keep you in the lane.
I literally used that illustration with my father the other day.
Okay.
It's like, we need that.
Yeah.
Or it makes it easier.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, we could be playing hard mode Christianity without the bumpers. But like, why not have these guardrails that help us?
Right.
So when you were involved in maybe the church or in the college ministry, did you have a negative view of tradition, or was that kind of not really a conversion point for you in reverting?
I don't think I had a negative view.
Okay.
The church I was going to and was on staff with was actually very liturgical.
Oh, cool.
We did like call and response.
Mm.
I don't even know where we got it. It was different every week. There's
Mm.
some things that we said. We said the same. What did we say? If I started, I probably could finish it, but it was what we do in the Catholic Church of I have sinned, I have sinned.
So some sort of confession.
A confessional
Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
So we were mixing the
Yeah.
line.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't
it's
handle.
coming back in style.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and I liked it so much more. We still had
Mm.
like guitar worship,
Sure.
contemporary music.
Mm-hmm.
That was really good. We had a really good band.
Mhm.
We did communion, but didn't consider it like the actual body and blood, Eucharistic style.
Right. Low theology, the Eucharist, probably.
Yeah. So I found that attractive,
Hmm.
but it felt like it was missing something. I couldn't really put my finger on it. And I think all these things were happening at once, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Feeling unsatisfied with the Sunday service of its purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Not feeling like I was being poured into, even with someone someone on staff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even like. Should I guess I was about to ask a question. Should I even have been on staff? I don't
Sure.
know, but I had a very specific role. Like the cafe was my ministry, right?
Sure.
And then all these different learnings from Jewish roots and not really trusting if everything I've learned from my college years till now, like what is true, what isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And then my job with that church kind of came to an end because they were just moving in a different direction with the cafe.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt really hurt or not seen in that transition because it was leaving me without my job, and I was not being asked to be on staff unless I was going to fundraise majority of my salary, and I was so over fundraising for my salary
Because you had done that all through.
because I had done
the
that for
ministry years.
being
Yeah.
on staff with that ministry, and so I was being left churchless.
Mm-hmm.
I was invited to stay a part of that congregation.
But you had no desire
But
to
I'm
at that
like-
point because you've been hurt so much.
Yeah, it was almost felt like a slap in the face to be
Sure.
asked to, like, we'd still love to have you around.
It's kind of like getting fired from a job and be like, but still come in as a customer
Yeah,
all the time, please. Yeah.
yeah.
That's
Because I did make some good community there.
sure.
Around, I don't know if it was necessarily even around church, but maybe just like shared interest, coffee. There's a couple people I talked heavily with scripture, and I went to a couple Bible studies throughout my years there. But being left churchless, I was like, where do I go?
Mm-hmm.
What do I do? A couple of years back from all of that coming to a peak, I almost became Catholic. But I had kind of logicked myself into, it doesn't really matter what I believe, which I find so idiotic now. And like it very much matters like where I associate myself. I can't just be like rogue Christian.
Yeah.
How much, especially with how much the body, I mean the Bible talks about being a body, being one
Right.
body talk.
Indivisible, yeah.
I think today at Mass,
Mhm.
Theology of the Body
Mm-hmm.
was mentioned.
Mhm.
I just started hearing about that, so I'm excited to read some of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really
Talk
good.
about the dignity of the human person
Yeah.
and sexuality and family and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that we are meant to be a part of something.
Mm-hmm.
We were meant to be following Jesus in community. We can't do it alone.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned. So having that in mind, and then needing to find a church, I actually went to an Anglican church for about a month.
Okay.
What made you decide to go there? Because did you know what Anglicanism was at that point, or?
I was doing some research, but I think I
Okay.
felt kind of weary about just jumping in full force Catholic again.
Yeah, it's like it feels like a big step because
Yeah.
I know for us, like there became a point where we realized like if we become Catholic, there's no going back without like serious repercussions. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I almost didn't fully know what I was going to be doing going back to Catholicism. But Anglicanism felt like this happy medium.
Yep.
The via media, they call it, the middle way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not the narrow way, though.
The medium.
Yeah.
So that, I tried that for a month.
Okay.
Maybe 6 weeks. And I don't think it had anything to do with that church. They were great. I actually met with the pastor. That pastor used to come into my coffee shop all the time. I've served him coffee. We had a really good relationship. But something just felt off. I was sitting in service, and I don't know if this is because I was so recently traumatized by this church. I say traumatized because it was like 6 months of grueling. I don't know what's going to happen with my job, if I'm going to be a part of this community anymore, and it just was a 6-month process.
Yeah.
And then it was a pretty abrupt end, and
just
then you
ended.
felt like that like took away a lot of your friends, all your coworkers,
My social network.
all at once. It was just kind of gone.
Yeah, my faith community, like it was just gone. I just felt very low, isolated. So now I'm trying to find a new church, feeling isolated. And the Anglican church was kind of stepping into that, but I think it felt too similar. Because like, the Anglican church is still very liturgical. It almost felt like a carbon copy of what I was doing at this other church, under a different banner, obviously Anglicanism, but with different people. And I remember a couple services just sitting in my chair and almost like hyperventilating.
Oh, wow.
Because I was like almost on a borderline of a panic attack, just because it was like uncanny valley of like, this feels too similar. Where am I? What am I doing? What are they even saying? What do I believe about God? And it was really hard for me to even go there the first week I showed up at a new church. And I was just like, God, I don't want to be here, but I'm going to be here. I'm just going to trust that. And then I started hyperventilating at service. Or just like, not hyperventilating, I was just like, had to take
Strong
deep breaths.
anxiety, yeah.
And like, just strong anxiety.
Yeah.
And I remember leaving a couple of those services. I'm like, God, this isn't it. I should be feeling deep peace when I'm in your holy space.
Yeah.
When I'm in front of you, honoring you on my Sunday. And I was just like, please give me a way to feel that peace. And it happened to be a Thursday after that like 6th Sunday I went to that church. And I just heard this voice in my head saying, go to Mass. And I'm like, no.
That's dumb.
That is dumb.
That was clearly me making things up.
Yeah.
Had you been thinking of it at all, or was it out of nowhere kind of?
Because I was like open. I was like open to going to a new church. I knew I needed community. I was trying Anglican. I was trying to like cheat the system of not becoming Catholic.
Sure. You were because you had studied some stuff at this point, right? Had you had read some history or what was it that had?
I had known, I mean, especially before going into the Anglican church, I'm like, I need to know like what they're about. And I kind of got to the like King Henry paying someone to get him married. And I don't know why.
It's not a pretty start.
Yeah. I was like, that was really far away. Maybe things are different now. They probably are. I don't want to talk bad about Anglicanism.
It's a hot mess right now.
Is it?
It's a hot
I'm
mess
going
right
to rely on your statements on it then. You can get in trouble on your own.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Thing.
Yeah.
I'll just claim ignorance.
Yeah.
But with, I was kind of just, I've always been into like theology and research, and I'd almost become Catholic a couple years ago. I really just didn't want to jump through the hoops of becoming a Catholic again because I thought I had to do a lot.
Sure.
It turns out I was already baptized, and I just really had to go to confession.
Yeah, you were already
Everything was
confirmed
fine.
too.
And I was
So
already
you just had to
confirmed.
go to confession.
Yeah.
What had at that first kind of go around though? What was it that had made you consider Catholicism in the first place?
Because I was just feeling that lack in church
okay.
of what are we doing here?
Oh, sure.
I don't know if you remember this, but we had talked during that time.
Okay.
Because it was when we were first considering it, and I kind of got to the point where I was like, okay, there was like these 5 or 6 things
Yeah, because we were
about
reading a lot of church history.
we were reading a lot of church history, and I was like, there's like 5, 6 things that are really different about Protestantism. And they were things more like the early church, there's a lot of evidence for like high view of Mary, praying to her,
the
praying to
Eucharist.
saints, infant baptism, the Eucharist, some sort of, church structure in terms of the apostolic succession, leading to bishops, pope, all that. And then a liturgical form for worship. And I was just like, none of these are present in the Protestant church. So that's where we were kind of going through the journey of like, this might be it. And I remember we had talked on the phone and I kind of told you that. You said, really? What? And like, what are the things? And so I had shared them with you, and then I sent you a couple things after. I don't know if you ever looked at them or not, and then
I probably didn't.
you might have a little bit, because I think we talked about it a couple times. And I remember a phone call where I was like, oh, like, have you looked into Catholicism anymore? You're like, yeah, but like, I just don't think it matters. Like, God doesn't really care where we are. Like, he loves all of us.
So you were just sending him evidence.
Right.
So you're trying to white pill him.
Yeah. So it was like, okay, so it wasn't that many conversations, but there was a couple, I think, at that first time where you considered it. And I was like, oh, he might be thinking about it. But we hadn't even been confirmed yet. So
we weren't even fully committed, I guess, at that point. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I didn't want to do the work that I thought was required to be part of the Catholic Church.
Sure.
And there's some certain things I didn't know I believed, maybe, except for Mary. And I think I felt okay with the saints at that point. And then I think the Eucharist, I didn't really fully understand that.
Yeah.
And I think as I've learned, being a Christian for the last 10 years, I've learned to respect people's spiritual journeys. And I think I swung so far that way that I didn't think it mattered where I was.
Right.
So that's how I kind of got myself out of following down the Catholic path like you were in that moment.
Yeah, I think that's an easy thing to do. I think there's a period where we kind of had both done that. Maybe not. I know that before I had met you, I had come really close. I probably almost was Catholic like 6 times before we actually became Catholic in hindsight. But I would always come back to something similar to that of like, well, I know I love God and he's working in all these different places. So at the end of the day, it probably doesn't matter too much. So I can kind of pick the one that's the nicest for me.
Yeah.
And then I think eventually there's just so much evidence that I was reading. Something kept bringing me back to the evidence.
Right.
And then that's what kind of did me. And I was like, well, can't get around it eventually.
Right.
And then I drug you into it.
You did.
Yeah.
That's true.
Depending on who you ask, I totally brainwashed Gina. So.
You care.
Yeah.
I think another big step in that, so I had said that from that church I was working at, we had lost a lot of staff. Our old worship pastor ended up leaving. He was one of the first people to leave in that whole mess. And I didn't find this out till later, but he had actually became Catholic.
Really?
From being our worship pastor at a non-denominational. I actually didn't even know where he was going. I knew he was doing ecumenical work of like bringing the Protestant world and the Catholic world together.
Yeah.
And I thought that's just what he was doing.
Sure.
Still,
Like,
I thought it was like maybe like an
now
undercover.
He's on the other side.
Yeah, I was trying to bring the Protestant world into the Catholic.
Yeah. So that's kind of like where I had went to Mass. I had that calling, and because I'm so logically driven, I was like calling myself silly and stupid, like I'm not going to Mass. But thankfully, Mass is held every day.
You have to say, did you go the day that you heard that?
Yeah, I was just like, it was like around 11, and I looked up Mass near me, and there was one at noon, and I just went to noon Mass at Old St. Mary's in Cincinnati. And I just remember sitting there and sitting down, and just peace literally just like washed over me. And I just like knew I was supposed to be there. And I was so confused by it, because like the whole car ride there, I was just listening to my body while my head was fighting with myself, saying like, Josh, I can't believe you're going to Mass. That's like what I'm saying to myself. But I was just like, I need my body to take me, because I just felt it going there.
It just felt like it needed to be there. That's so interesting.
And I did take communion because I just had.
You didn't. Yeah, you didn't know at that point.
I didn't know. Not that it's necessarily bad that I took communion. It just probably was like not smiled upon.
Right.
But just because I hadn't been to confession in so long, and it'd been years since I'd been into a Catholic church. But it felt like right, so I just like did it. But that pastor I was mentioned earlier, I had asked to get coffee with him.
The Anglican one? Or
No, the one that the worship pastor?
Yeah, the worship pastor.
So you knew he had become Catholic at this point?
No, not yet.
Oh, you didn't know yet?
At this moment.
Interesting.
After I went to
It's gonna
Mass.
get juicy here in a second.
Yeah, so this is one of my like flags in the ground of like where the Eucharist became real to me. So I asked him to get coffee. And in that, once we sat down, I got to know that he actually converted to Catholicism. And I was like, no way. Just sitting across this table, like, what is happening? Like, am I going to be like, become Catholic again?
Is it going to rub off on me?
Yeah. Is it some disease? Like, the ick? And I started just pouring out, like, what all these pains I've been feeling with church, and how, like, he had felt a similar way from the church that we had both now left. And being really careful not to trauma bond, but just kind of share our experiences. And sharing out, one of the pain points that I shared was that, have you ever heard of Anne Lamott?
Yeah.
She's like a poetry writer.
Uh-huh.
I heard her speaking, funnily enough, on, have you heard of The Midnight Gospel?
No.
It's a Netflix.
Oh yeah, it's the one where the guy like
Duncan Trussell.
Yeah, he totally like becomes like demonically possessed to heal people or something, right? Is that what you're talking about, or is this a different?
No,
that's Midnight Mass.
That's Midnight Mass, which is also really good.
Yeah,
depending on where you fall on the spectrum.
Midnight Gospel, I don't know.
It's an animated series.
Oh, okay.
And anyway, they take their podcast. I don't want to ruin it. I already said it. They take their podcast and they animate a podcast episode around the conversation they're having.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's really cool. But Anne Lamott was on that podcast, and one of the episodes they animated was with her on it. And she was talking about Jesus at one point, and she tells this story of this little girl who's screaming like, "Mommy, mommy, mommy," she's waking up from a nightmare. And her parents come rushing into the room, and she's like, "Mommy, mommy, I'm scared." And the parents go, "Well, you can always call in the name of Jesus when you're scared." And she's like, "Yeah, mommy, I know, but sometimes I want someone with skin on." And that just like struck me so deeply, because it's like, yeah, that's sometimes how I feel with my faith. It's sometimes the Protestant world is so ethereal. It's so like I have to logically understand it, that like God is with me. I just have to know that. But really lacking this almost embodiment.
Which is so funny, because the doctrine the doctrine of the incarnation is so essential to Christianity. But then to have this ethereal experience where it's never
really feeling it.
Yeah.
And so I'm sharing that story with my old worship pastor, and he like stops me and he's like, "Josh, you know that's what the Eucharist is. It's God in the flesh. That's the answer to your prayer." And I just like, my mind was blown. It felt like God was meeting me in such a deep way, promising me every Sunday, I'm going to be physically there for you and with you to guide you and even just be my friend. And so that's kind of like this, my first Eucharistic moment was being told that is his body.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's God, but with some skin on.
With some skin on.
I think there's a Father Mike Schmitz sermon somewhere where he talks about that as like when you really love somebody, like you want to kiss them. Like a marriage is consummated in a sense by a kiss. A little more than that, but like, you know what I mean? There's like the moment of consummation in a love relationship. And even someone you love in a platonic sense, like when you really love someone, like it's not beyond, like you want to hug them. Like that's how we connect with somebody. And the Eucharist is that consummation of that marriage every Sunday. It's literally, it's like kissing Jesus. Like you're becoming one with him in a real and true way, in the same way that Paul compares marriage of a man and a wife to Christ and the church. Like that is the marriage bed of the church, in a sense. That is the unitive act of us to Christ, is the Eucharist. So that's really true, right? Like that's really a true thing. Like we're becoming intimately united to the Lord in the Eucharist, which is also why it is serious. Like it's why there is like the whole, check your conscience before you go and like cleanse yourself and and that whole thing. Yeah, it's really beautiful.
Yeah, it's something it's a sustaining factor of your life. There's energy behind it. It's so important to receive that. And I get it now. It's like if you do miss like a Sunday, you must feel like, dang,
Yeah,
I needed that.
Yeah.
it's like being
you
away
really
from your
miss out.
wife. Yeah, it's gonna be me next week when you're still in Ohio and I have to go home.
I know.
Yeah, but for real, no, I get. Yeah, it's okay. So you had that experience where now the Eucharist kind of maybe makes sense on a personal level. Did you still have theological questions about it at that point, or was that something you were kind of already okay with? Or?
Yeah, I think in that moment I was like, once I heard that thing about the Eucharist, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna be Catholic. I'm kind of a head first kind of guy, and I'll figure it out on the way.
Yeah.
But I just having that experience in Mass by myself, and then learning that God is promising and wanting to be with me in the flesh, and that's how it's always been. And kind of swooping back to my testimony when I heard God's voice saying, "I've been with you your entire life." It's like he's now meeting me there with the Eucharist 9 years later from when I first decided to give my life to Christ in the way I did.
And many years after having actually received the Eucharist as a kid.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's almost
It's
like
wild.
he was waiting that long for you to come back for him.
Yeah, and I think this is so important about someone's spiritual journey, because I think what I said earlier about I really believe in everyone's spiritual journey, that it is not our timeline, but God's timeline. That's such a cheesy Christian faux pas, but it's so true. And a part of my spiritual journey was stepping away from the Catholic faith, becoming the leader in that Christian ministry, in Protestantism for the last 9 years, so that I was ready to come back into the Catholic Church. Maybe there might be some theological holes there, but I believe that God has us on a journey, and we just need to be patient with the people around us, because He's so patient with us.
So from that moment, you've now you're like, I feel like there is a line in the sand. I don't remember what ours was, because I feel like I had like 12 lines in the sand. But you're like, okay, I'm gonna be Catholic. That's like the point of no return. And then from there, like, how did you approach kind of reintegrating?
So I started going to church with my old worship pastor.
Okay.
And that was at St. Gertrude's. Beautiful parish.
So
I
this is the
love it.
Dominican parish, you said, right? So you're going to the
Yeah. God, I'm so sad to not be
You come into
there.
the church in the Dominican rite.
Yeah, you were like sending me pictures on some of the different
Yeah.
like church holidays. Like I think the All Saints
Yeah,
Day
All Saints
picture
Day.
you sent me. I was like, that's so cool. He was like, oh, we have like 40 relics that they paraded around the church. Do you guys do that? I was like, seriously?
Our priest has
Yeah.
a lot of relics,
does,
but
yeah.
needs a...
I have never seen 40 of them paraded around though.
Yeah, they were
That's
just like
awesome.
on this board,
bless the
and they just
Dominican.
had it up, and they were just encircling the congregation. And the amount of beauty that is just in the Catholic Church.
Talk about like a tangible expression of the cloud of witnesses.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
And why not? Like,
Yeah.
I heard things of like, we shouldn't have like all these statues in the Catholic Church, but like if you look at the Bible, it's like inscripted in there to have cherubim and cherubim in
Statuary
this.
in the temple.
Yeah. It's like we're meant to do it together, even if you've passed from your body. We're meant to do it together.
Yeah, Yeah. So you started going to mass regularly, and then you were looking for other ways to get involved. What did you end up doing? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So even though I didn't have to go through RCIA, I had been so distanced from the Catholic Church for so long. I just was like hungry and wanted to know more. So I was like, for a couple of weeks, I was going to 2 RCIAs a week of different churches just to
Soak it all up.
soak it up because, again, head first. That was not sustainable. So that only lasted about a month.
Sure.
And so I just doubled down on St. Gertrude's just because that's where I had some connections. But it's strange, the second RCIA I went to, I ended up going, I was a couple weeks past when I started Gertrude's from the beginning and then decided I wanted to do more things. And I'd lost all my community. I really had so much free time. So I was wanting to just get connected.
I'll go to 2 RCIA. It's no problem.
Yeah.
In the second RCIA I went to, I ended up seeing someone there. I was like, why the heck are you here? And it took me such a long time to place him, but he was an old coworker of mine that I never would have expected to be Catholic. And he had recently just converted to Catholicism 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So he wasn't necessarily Catholic when I worked with him, but now he was. And I'm like,
why are all these
what's
Catholic
up?
people?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was, and I would have been really feeling like a lack of friendship in
Yeah.
that moment too. And so I felt God was just like giving me someone. So someone I knew,
Yeah.
someone I felt comfortable with in a completely new environment, both at St. Gertrude's and at St. Cecilia's. And
Was the music good at St. Cecilia's?
it was better at Gertrude.
Oh,
no.
man, because it's St. Cecilia's, the patron saint of music, so it's just you would hope
Had to
that,
ask.
yeah.
It was
That's okay.
it was good.
That's okay.
But Gertrude's, they had like a professional chorus, you know, like you can't really beat that. It was all like we were talking earlier about the Dominican rite being in Latin. So most of even in their English service we sang all in Latin every single time. So I really loved that. And just the reverence of a church. You just know you're somewhere special. You carry yourself differently going into a space like that. And nothing against, like, maybe not as prominent or beautifully adorned Catholic churches, but it's definitely different than going into a gymnasium.
That's certainly true, right? Like the whole like portable projector screen with like really bad AV equipment and like,
being broadcast from another church somewhere else.
Oh man, nothing pains me more than satellite campuses. It's bad. It's really Especially I feel like a lot of churches in those streams too after COVID were just like, hey, we saved a lot of money just like live streaming. Why spend all the money on all these different pastors and stuff?
Right.
You know? It's just Yeah,
I guess so RCIA was a thing I was doing. And I think that was really I'm still like integrating my life back around that.
Yeah, because really, has this only been like the last year or less even?
I just started the past summer, so it's been like only 8 months.
Yeah.
wow.
How
was that?
So much newness.
How was that first confession? Did you like go right to confession or did you wait?
So
I
just talked to a priest.
Okay.
It wasn't. I think I'm still scared. I've only been to one.
Oh, okay, sure.
So maybe that's not good.
You only have to go once.
So maybe something I do want to say is that it is scary. Still parts of it.
Yeah.
Of becoming Catholic again is just uncharted territory.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember going to confession when I was young and really just saying like I was mean to my sister, and then having to go pray. But I almost don't know what to do with the priest and like the closed door.
Yeah, the confessional.
It's like So I will maybe admit that I don't know what I'm doing with that, and I've put it off.
Oh, totally.
So I repent right now. But I'm gonna figure that out soon. I've been like kind of feeling that like I need last Sunday I was like I need to go do that.
Yeah.
But I didn't. So I'm still learning. I'm still on my way.
Well, confessions I think it's really intimidating because like especially from a Protestant perspective, there's such a emphasis, or at least for me there was, on you don't need another person. Like you just go right to God and tell him whatever, and then he's cool with it, and then you just get on with your day. But the vulnerability of having to tell someone with some skin on, right, makes it feel way more real. Like, of course, if it's just me and God and I'm telling him, like, that is real. Like, even the church teaches you can have an act of perfect contrition and be absolved and still have to, they still say to go to confession, obviously, but there's something beautiful and human about it being in flesh, like when the priest is in persona Christi, and you're kind of rending your heart to this man that you have to see. Like we had our priest on a couple weeks ago, and I was like, I have to confess my worst, dirtiest thing to you, and then see you at the pancake breakfast. And then he laughed because he's like, I usually forget. Like, God gives us the grace to forget, but there's something challenging about that where it almost makes it more real, which, like, telling God face to face would be the most real thing, but like telling someone that he's put there, like, it's that human connection. And then to have that person every time meet you with, like, I absolve you of your sins, like, go in peace, is so. I feel like I ripped the Band-Aid off with confession, though, because we were really scared, and I think you were more scared than me. I just said, I'm going every 2 weeks. It is. I just said, I don't care. I'm going every 2 weeks. Okay. This priest is going to think I'm nuts. And maybe our first priest did, but our new priest loves it. So I just ripped the Band-Aid off. I made it like a grocery store item, because we had some friends that we had made it at the parish say, like, make it like a grocery store errand thing where you just, oh, today I got to go to the grocery store, got to go to the gym, got to go to confession, like, ain't no thing, you know, and make it like a routine. I feel like that's been helpful for me.
And I guess there's nothing really different.
Sure.
If I compare it to, like, our Protestant mentorship, discipleship, we shared all of our deepest secrets with whoever our discipler was, our mentor. But the difference is they're not absolving. And saying, like, go in peace. They're like, hey, I get it.
Yeah, I struggle with that too.
Yeah, me too.
And
there's some solidarity in that.
there is.
But
And there's a closeness.
Catholics
there's a
should
bond.
still have that relationship for sure with people.
Yeah. But it just feels when someone is in persona Christi, in all these, like, and is ordained in robes, it feels like so much more like lucrative, or like if you don't do it, you're gonna be. It's like, it's intimidating.
Totally intimidating. I love when they have the screen, especially if I'm going to a parish where I'm like, I don't know. I like Father Matthew, our priest now, because it kind of feels like those discipleship relationships, in that I know I can walk in there and I can storm in there all mad about something I've done and just kind of like give it all to him, and he'll be like, okay, and then he'll have a conversation with me. But when I'm, like, traveling and I go to confession, I'm like, where's the screen, man? I'm not going to look at you. I'm totally going to be behind the privacy screen, and I'm just going to give you the list, and then you're going to give me the penance, and then we're going to get out of here. Because this total stranger just coming in and being like, hey, here's this thing I did in traffic, and here's what I said to my wife, or whatever. They're like, okay, dude. But when it's Father Matthew, I'm like, which I prefer that. Because then it feels relational. But
it does.
It's not necessary. The privacy screen was a really good feature, I think, for the church to implement. It's just like, you can just
say whatever.
Well, then you have to think from the priest's perspective. We asked our priest about this. I was like, what's it like from your perspective? And he's like, well, the first couple of years I thought I heard everything, and then I learned to stop saying that.
Because you just don't know what you're going to get.
He's like, if there's a thing that can be done, some human being somewhere has done it.
Wow.
Which is so funny. Yeah. It is intimidating, though.
Yeah. Something else I was thinking about was, I don't know if you've listened to Bishop Barron very much.
Once.
A little bit. He's like of the opinion that one of the main things that'll be drawing people to the Catholic Church in the coming years will be just the beauty of it.
Okay, so I've been saying this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I kind of
got it
so
from
funny.
you.
Oh, did he? I'd love to hear that.
So yeah, because it's like both of us had a very intellectual journey where I was like, all right, well, if these things are true, I have to go here, type
A
thing.
plus B equals C. Convert.
And I know that was true for you in a sense, but I also feel like it came at a time where you were really hurting, and a lot of the beauty was like soothing and healing to you. So I wanted to just hear what your thoughts were about the beauty of the church and the liturgy, and like how that kind of drew you back in and maybe like might have comforted or healed you in some ways.
Yeah, I think, not that truth is bad, but I think I was getting so, like, waterlogged with truth.
Just like hyper focused on
Hyper
that.
focused on
Okay.
it. Because the gospel is like true, beautiful, and good. I think it's Aristotle. Those are like three. It's some of the transcendental principles. You know what I'm talking about, Drew?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I think there's more than three.
I'm making sure our mics are still good.
Okay.
I think mine is. Will you tap yours real quick?
Mine?
Yeah.
Mine's lighting up on 1.
Oh, it's lighting up here? Okay, it's still on. That's weird. It's not showing there. Sorry, keep going. Transcendentals. Just like right
There's
before the
like,
camera.
yeah, I'm talking about transcendental properties.
And I'm just checking my
Mhm.
mic.
Yeah, you're
Okay,
good.
yours is good. Yeah, I can see it there.
Okay. Is there more than 3? Maybe I'm putting you on the spot of.
Oh, man.
I know truth, beauty, and goodness.
Truth, beauty, and goodness. I think those are the main three,
Three.
especially for the Catholic tradition.
Yeah. So I think, especially in today's society, we are having such a hard time figuring out what is true and what is not. When it comes to social media, when it comes to political spectrum, what protest, if any, should I be going to? How to even like cook my food the right way? What food am I
Yeah.
buying? Is it
Is
processed?
the keto diet good or is
Yeah.
it horrible? Yeah.
Across every spectrum, so you're getting, and then the algorithm's throwing you into your echo chamber
Absolutely.
that you got is now like labeled on your forehead by them. So we're just having this horrible time of discerning what is true and what isn't, and it's caused chaos. And so I really think we're entering this area of beauty where there's not much argument around what is beautiful. If you're looking at the sunset or the Grand Canyon or even a piece of art, I mean, there's some art out there.
Some people have twisted beauty. It
Yeah.
can be done. Yeah. It can be done.
But I think there's an attractiveness to the beauty. And then when it comes to, I just think that that's where we might be heading when it comes to God and God using out of his massive tool belt, a way of drawing people in to him. Because that's what has been true for me with the church, with liturgy, seeing I'm entering a beautifully adorned place that obviously was built in care and reverence to a creator that makes good things, that cares about his people. And knowing that everyone across the world is partaking in the same mass that day, even singing the same songs, singing the same words. There's something really beautiful about that in the community aspect. I don't know, I've just been shown that beauty is everywhere and it's easily missed. You have to just look for it and it can be found. So whether that's at work, when I'm helping a customer, seeing them in the eyes of God and knowing that they're there for help and I can help them, or just seeing an old friend. There's something beautiful to be found in every part of our day. Eating pancakes with
That's what we
homemade
pancakes.
maple syrup.
That syrup is beautiful. I will say. So her family makes maple syrup. That's what we're in Ohio doing.
Fresh from these babies, right?
Yeah.
It's your yard.
Yeah. And that is, I mean, that's a testament to what you're saying, that there's something unavoidably beautiful about reality. And I mean, that's the beautiful thing about the transcendentals, right? Is they're aligned in some ways that like people might be confused about what the truth is or how to find it, but when they find what's beautiful, there's no arguing it.
Yeah.
And like there is like the twisted art that might not actually be beautiful, but someone's like, no, this is beautiful. But like when everyone sees something that's like actually beautiful, they're like, whoa. Like there's a reason that tourists go to the Sistine Chapel, even if they're not Catholic.
Yeah.
Like I got a text from my friend today who's not Catholic, and he's in St. Peter's Basilica. And he's like, I was thinking of you. And I'm like, you're in an objectively beautiful place, and it's like moving you towards connection, right? And
Yeah.
Same thing with
You want to tell someone
creation.
about it.
Yeah, you want to. Beauty makes you evangelize for things that you might not fully even be on board with, you know. So I think that is going to be big. What about, I mean, obviously, like the ornateness of the decoration and the liturgy and stuff, but like, tell us just about your experience with the beauty of the faith. Like, what about that
Yeah.
in terms of beauty is what drew you?
I love the tradition aspect. Some of the stuff I learned in RCA is like, what we do now was mostly orally passed down, and then it was written down, and that's how they wrote down information, or that's how they passed along information. It was your word mattered so much more, because not everyone could read and write the way we're so privileged to experience now. So I really loved the tradition, even learning about Mary. I had a Mary experience
Really?
right after I had it was like a tiny one, but it meant something to me.
Sure.
Right after I went to Mass for the first time, and after I think I met with that pastor, my old worship pastor, I was just feeling really still like anxious and wavering, mostly probably because of the community that I had lost. But at RCA, I just learned about Mary being our mother and Queen of Heaven, and all that was like really hard for me to digest. And what it even looks like to pray to Mary,
Sure,
felt really strange. Or even like the Litany of the Saints, praying that, which I've never done that fully yet. Something I want to do. There's so many things. I'll finish my Mary story. I have like really bad night terrors sometimes, and we're to the point where I like have seen physical things manifest, and
in your dreams or like
in real life.
In real life,
yeah.
Oh, that's terrifying.
Or that whole experience of not being able to wake up from a dream.
Oh yeah.
Knowing I'm in a dream, or like that's a bad way to explain it. I feel I've woken up and something terrible is happening, and then I start back at the beginning of what just happened. I like get looped in the same experience.
Oh, wow.
So that happens, but then there's also times where I'm awake. I know I'm awake, and I've seen demons in my room. It's hard to talk about because it seems very. My rule with the spiritual world is, you can't not talk about it, but you shouldn't talk about it too much.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Gives them not enough. It's not recognizing them there gives them power, and over fixating on them gives them too much power.
Yeah.
You need to find the happy medium.
Yeah.
But I was coming off a stint of having pretty strong night terrors, and there was a night before I went to sleep. I was like, I need a motherly figure. I'm gonna pray to Mary. And I just felt like Mary, after I finished praying, I just felt like I was being embraced. I was being hugged in my bed. And I was like, this is weird, but I feel very comforted right now. And so that was my first like Mary experience. And I don't know, it was just giving like teeth to something that felt so logically driven, or it was starting to feel farther away from me. And I think it was like this rope pulling me in of like, our faith is active and strong and real, and there's these aspects of it that I wasn't taking advantage of. Like, I don't think I was less in the fold as a Protestant, but I can just be more actively engaged as a Catholic.
Yeah, that's just kind of a dynamic I like to talk about of like entering into the fullness of like, there's all these things, you know, because like even Vatican II as a council teaches that the baptisms of many Protestants are valid. Like, the form is valid, the words are, so they would be validly baptized as Protestants. So in a sense, they are brothers and sisters. But there's so much more that God has for us. Like, there's all these gifts, these beautiful gifts, like his mother. Like, he wants us to have a mother. He wants us to have himself in the Eucharist, and he wants us to have mercy and confession. And it's not to say that you don't have a real faith before becoming Catholic, but there's so much more And yeah, don't we want everything Jesus has for us? Like if there's something he wants to give us, shouldn't we want it? And there's just so much grace that he can give us in the saints, in the liturgy, and the teaching of the church with his mother especially. She's pretty dope. Like
Yeah, she's pretty cool.
she's pretty cool, man.
And it almost takes just a couple, I wouldn't say minutes, but just takes some time and then looking into what is even taught about Mary. I think there's so much from the Catholic way that I just assumed I knew or fully understood or wanted to write off so quickly. But doing just some research and you sending me books, those books really helped me. I had some of those
Where'd you send
moments.
Why We're Catholic by Trent Horn, and then The Early Church was the Catholic Church
by Joe Heschmeyer.
That one
That's a
one
good
got
one.
me. That my worship pastor knows.
Oh, he knows
Heschmeyer.
Joe? Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
which is so
Casual.
funny.
We got to get this guy on the
That's-
podcast.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
good one.
Oh, he's an amazing man.
Okay.
If you're ever in Cincinnati, I'll hook you up.
Nice.
I don't know what I was saying.
Oh, that's
Where
good.
were we at?
I think you were talking about Mary, and maybe you've already answered all of this, but like you were saying before, like you felt like there was a depth that was lacking, or like you could only grow to a certain point. How do you see like the potential expanded now? And maybe you feel like you've already answered that, but
Well, that reminds me of something Tim Keller would talk on that stuck with me from back then was sometimes you feel like you know God, you know him so well, and you're like standing on this hardwood floor, and then all of a sudden something happens, and it's like a trap door like fell through, and now you're falling, and that he related that, and then you hit the ground, and he related that to like we think that we know God, we find the depth of which we know him, and then we hit another bottom and realize like, oh, I didn't really know God. That analogy feels like really harsh.
Sure.
It almost
because
feels
you
like
do have to be free falling in order to
Yeah.
reach the next point.
yeah. Yeah. I really feel like God's walking me down a staircase instead
That's
of like
gentler.
pulling the lever.
That's
KRONK.
gentlemanly, yeah.
Um,
KRONK.
yeah. He's not Yzma.
Oh,
Um,
unless you have PSA theology.
well, it almost like it would make sense in PSA theology because it's like
What was
you weren't
whole-
worth it
what's
anyway.
that
Here's the
Shan
trap
song,
door.
Though you slay me, yet I will praise you. Ooh.
And then there's the version with John Piper saying, "When you have cancer, when your family's dying."
God is glorified by your cancer. Yeah. Oh man, that's so brutal.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Yeah.
you're back to your beautiful point.
Yeah, God has been. I don't know. I haven't figured out what floor I'm standing on that I think I've known the depth of God. I was thinking like I was reading or mostly listening to a podcast around Teresa of Avila's.
Yeah.
Is it Glass?
Interior
Castle.
Oof.
And
Talk about rooms and floors.
rooms and
yeah,
floors. Yeah, so many. That's such a heady book. It's so crazy, but so beautiful. There's so many.
She literally levitated.
I didn't know that.
She like levitated at one point, and she was like, "Someone pushed me back down." She didn't like it. I'm pretty sure that was Teresa of Avila.
Yeah, but I don't know. Maybe I started thinking of a glass castle. That when we have the eyes to see, we can see all of the rooms at once. We can see all the floors, and maybe there's like a smoke screen on the bottom, and like God clears that up and walks us down the next level. I haven't perfected that metaphor yet. but
Yeah.
it feels like we're more in a glass castle than a haunted house. You know.
Like, there's a bunch to explore, and maybe like this devotional over here or this experience over there. Like, it's there, but you're not necessarily in it yet. But you know that you could. There's
I
like
could
the
get
freedom
that.
to get.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah. So I think I'm excited to continue that journey, and that's what feels beautiful about it. And I have a whole mansion to explore, a whole glass castle.
Yeah, converting or reverting is really the beginning of it, right? It's like your wedding day. It's like the beginning of it. When you get married, it's the beginning of your marriage, not the end of your relationship,
Yeah, and it's making me want to find the thing I don't know yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And find that depth. and
Yeah,
find
so
the
you're playing
beauty.
hide and seek with God now instead of being like, don't pull the floor out for me.
Yeah, where you're not, I'm not walking on eggshells or tiptoeing. It's like, is this God?
Yeah.
To figure out that I'm now falling.
Yeah.
Mm.
Do you feel like there were any like spiritual disciplines or anything like that you were doing before that you're like, because I know for me, I was like, oh, the college ministry report taught us all these things, and those were just like their specialties that they invented. And then when I became Catholic, I was like, wait a second. This thing with a different name sounds very similar to that thing.
Can you give me an example?
So
maybe?
we were taught in our ministry how to do a quiet time, right?
Okay, yeah.
Tell everyone what a quiet time is.
A quiet time or a tog. Time
with
alone.
God.
Time alone with God. It was like, it's a time to read your Bible and pray, and it has to happen daily, or you're not doing it right. And you mostly should be journaling, or you're probably not doing it right.
If you're not writing Psalms as beautiful as David, then
yeah,
yeah.
or a beautifully bulleted point summarization of what you're learning. I think that's that rigidness that's like so tough.
Yeah.
Rigid and tough, I guess. It's the same word. But yeah, a quiet time, you just have to have it.
Yeah.
Would the Catholic version be Lectio Divina?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So after becoming Catholic, I learned about a spiritual practice called Lectio Divina.
I love Lectio Divina.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we've done that in our church.
Right.
Oh, okay.
So that is like, okay, you read the passage, you meditate on it, you pray, you like consider if God has, any action steps he wants you to take. And that's one of many options for how you can have like your personal prayer time every day. And I'm like,
That's the same thing.
okay, so
and they're like, Catholics never read their Bible. Lectio Divina has been happening for literally thousands of years.
Well, and it has such a better like outcome too.
Yeah.
It's like, find this one word, then how does it go? You meditate on one word.
Yeah, you can focus on like one word or one image,
phrase.
something that sticks out. Yeah. Yeah.
And like, what is God saying about that?
Exactly.
And it personalizes it too, because like I think a lot of times converting to Catholicism, you can get to where you're like rigid with the Bible of like, it only means what the church says it means in this direct sense. But the Lectio Divina practice personalizes Scripture in the same way most Protestants have as their primary experience of Scripture. Like you open the Word, point to a random place, and go, "What's it saying for me?"
Especially when you do it in a group. Like if we,
group
Lectio is
great.
I've done group Lectios where we all just read the passage once, and then we just hear everyone's words saying it. And we'll do it again, and then we just go around and say one word that stood out to us.
Right.
We'll go around again.
Yeah. So that was one thing where I was like, oh, okay, this still exists in Catholicism, but actually maybe even in a deeper way than I knew it before. And it's one of many options. So I just wonder if there's anything for you like that where you're like, oh, this thing I was doing before, it's still present here, but in greater depth.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think even confession of like, there's prayer and confession, maybe I want to talk about. Confession, like we would confess to our discipler, but there's this depth in which the priest can absolve you and say, go in peace. And then I think even prayer, that we can pray to the saints, and then there's power in that. We can pray to Mary for certain things, or that we have guardian angels, all like the different layers of heaven.
Yeah.
Or what are they called?
Like the choirs of angels.
The choirs of
Is that what you're
angels.
talking about?
Yeah. And that prayer works with all of that. It's not just this. We can talk directly to God. We should do that. But there's just more resources.
Yeah.
And there's more people wanting to join you on that journey.
You got a bunch of fans in the stadium up in heaven who have like made it to the other side, and they're like, "Bro, it's great. We want you to make it here." Yeah,
you
they're
can
contending for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really a sweet thing. Like, that's what the saints has been one of my most cherished things I think about being Catholic. Of just like, because it's funny, like as humans, we can't help but naturally look up to the people that have inspired us. Like even in Protestantism, right? Like they have their like saints, so to speak. Depending on your tradition, whoever founded the tradition you're in is probably one of your people that you look up to, and you read a lot of their writings and model yourself. And St. Paul literally says in Scripture, imitate me as I imitate Christ. I forget which book that's from. But just having this resource of people who can pray for me and run with me, but they're already on the other side. They're in paradise with Christ now. So, like, I mean, I love both of you, and I want you to pray for me. But, like, how much better is it when it's someone who isn't also struggling anymore? Like, they have struggled and they can relate. They have sinned and been absolved, but then now they're victorious, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's always great. Like, if I'm struggling with something, I want to have communion with someone who has victory over it,
Yeah.
as well as someone who's in the mud.
Mm-hmm.
And we get both of those as Catholics, people who
That's
have
beautiful.
victory and are in the mud with us. Yeah.
Or even if we lose someone on this earth,
Mm-hmm.
we can pray to them
Mm-hmm.
for things that they were good at, or
Mm-hmm.
character qualities that they embellished.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's like love or hospitality,
Mm-hmm.
and like, hey, I need some help, or I need your guidance with that, and that could be your late mother or father.
Mm-hmm.
And how beautiful that you can still have that
Yeah.
power. They can have that power with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just a gift of God to give us communion with each other, which is how He's designed us. So, like, on one sense, it's weird to look back at, like, when I had a problem with that, of like, well, they're dead, you know, that's always, well, they're dead. But then it's like, God designed us to be in communion with each other. So why would He abrogate that? Why would He let death keep us from that when His whole mission was to destroy death?
Yeah.
When Jesus' whole purpose was like, I'm going to be the untying the knots of death, except with the communion between people, which is what I've designed you for.
Yeah.
But that's going to be the one thing death still has power
It just doesn't
over.
track. Right?
Yeah.
Or like
Yeah.
out of eternity, this 100 years, you're just gonna have this weird barrier of death.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't mind that I'm here to completely demolish it and humiliate death with my resurrection.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah. So then, have you had any like pushback from friends or family as you've like told them that you've returned to Catholicism? Or I feel like you don't get a lot of pushback. That's my perception. You get a lot of people who are curious.
Okay.
You've always been that way, I feel like you're like, oh, I just randomly had this conversation with this person about Jesus. It's like, how did that happen in that scenario? You're like on your way to the bathroom at a fast food restaurant or something. Like that feels like how random it could be. So what has that been like?
So I was actually very excited to tell people that I was Catholic. Not in the sense that I was when I first became I don't even know. Do I want to say first became a Protestant, or
when you had your
when I had my
experience on the mission trip?
Yeah.
I was so zealous then, like running
Don't mind
around.
The gunfire, if you can hear that. We're not being shot at.
It's far away.
And I did not wield that sword that I just got well.
Whack, whack, whack,
Yeah.
whack, whack, whack.
I was making bumps and bruises.
This Bible's sharper than a two-edged sword.
I think at one point, I don't think my mom's ever going to see this, but I told my mom she was going to hell because she idolized her children.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty
It's pretty rough, Joshua.
Yeah.
Like, calm down.
There might be a context in which that's true, but
I did similar things where I'm like, why did I say that?
Yeah, and something I've like definitely apologized to my mom for.
Sure.
But this time around, I've learned some lessons along the way, especially when it comes to love first, and then get to conversations of tougher variety. But alongside that, I'm never afraid to talk about my life, and a big part of my life is my faith. So I bring up that I'm Catholic. I bring up that I'm Christian. And it just leads places. And I think I've just always held that I'm not going to be afraid of this. Even though religion, politics are supposed to be off the table when it comes to strangers.
Sure.
I just drop it, and sometimes I have really beautiful conversations because they're practicing Catholic, or they're practicing Christian of any type, or they're faith-based, and they get to tell me about their life. But some of the people in my life that are Catholic, or thought I'd tell I told my grandmother that I was Catholic again.
Yeah.
Um,
Catholic again, only Catholic again. Oh, I love that.
Man. Oh,
Wait,
man.
like human,
Human
again,
again?
from Beauty and the Beast?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're getting to like that part in the podcast. It's like slap happy. This is when we should start pouring whiskey. And,
Yeah.
Yeah. So a funny story about my grandmother. She called the ministry headquarters when I went on staff, and she was like, "What are you doing with my grandson?"
I forgot about this.
And I'm like, I'm hearing this story, and I started just literally on the spot praying for the soul who answered that phone that day.
His Catholic grandma is coming at him.
Yeah.
So she's practicing like.
Both my sides of my family are just so culturally Catholic. They don't understand anything else.
Sure.
Or when I first became like a practicing Christian again, I remember visiting some family, and one of my aunts, she stood up at a table in public at a diner and started like pointed at me and said, "What would great grandmother think?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I think we'd have a pretty good conversation." So just really culturally Catholic.
Sure.
So I don't even think that they go to church, my aunt or my grandmother, but it's just held so deeply to the chest. So I got to tell her that I was Catholic again, and she's like, "Oh, that's great." Like nothing happened. Nothing happened.
She's like, before I'm calling the ministry and chewing them out, but now, okay.
Yeah. And maybe she's just like, "Okay, you're right where you belong. I don't have to do anything. Like there's no cause for alarm." But I thought I'd be like this, like, welcome home, because that's what I get now.
Yeah.
If I tell someone at the Catholic Church that I'm like, "Yeah, I just like I'm reverting back to Catholicism," I get welcome home.
Yeah, it's like
What's your
prodigal son.
response to that? Do you enjoy that, or do you find that because
it's kind of cheesy.
Sure,
It just
a little
feels
cheesy,
like chill
some people
out.
are
Like,
bothered by it too. Like there's been some people converting recently in the space. They're like, "Don't tell me that," and it's like not that I don't want to be welcomed home, but there's some people are like that. I liked it.
It's under the pretense that like you had it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which even if that's true,
you can show it without saying it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd rather just be like welcomed and
Yeah.
say like tell me how that happened.
Yeah. Or in a more private setting. I think it's the most annoying when it's like so a famous Christian apologetics YouTuber, Cameron Bertuzzi from Capturing Christianity, just announced he's converting to Catholicism, which of course just blew up the internet. Like we're talking a pretty large channel.
Say his name again?
Cameron Bertuzzi.
Okay. I don't know if I
Yeah, I mean he's a really neat. I've never met him, but from what I can tell, he's a neat guy. He's been on Matt Fradd's show a couple times, and he did like talk about logic. He did a Bayesian analysis on the probability of the papacy being true.
Oh my gosh.
And determined from like he would take all the evidence points for or against from all the academic sources he could find and weighted those based on the strength of the evidence. And then I think at one point it was like 99% probable the papacy was true, and I think by the time he converted it was like 89 or 92 or something, but it was still a really strong case. Anyways, he announced it, and the YouTube comments on that video they only go two ways. And one way is welcome home, like this sort of like triumphalist, like we got him thing. And then the other way is like, well, the Bertuzzis are going to hell because they're Catholic now. So there was like those two reactions. Anyways, that's kind of why I brought it up, because there's like this whole in the public sphere thing of like the two reactions of someone becoming Catholic on YouTube are usually the Protestants hate you, and then the Catholics are like, so we should just chill, and maybe like privately you can tell them welcome home, but publicly just chill.
I do want to say something on that, because when I was going through RCIA, I thought I was going to get to a point where we're going to start talking about Protestantism, and then the Catholics were going to just bash them.
Yeah.
I'm like, when's it going to happen?
See this guy? Let's throw darts at him as Luther.
Yeah. Some like holy bullseye.
I started to become Australian when I did that, because I'm just picturing Matt Fradd throwing darts at Luther for some reason. He wouldn't do
that.
Well, he'd probably do this.
Maybe.
But yeah.
It's like a joke.
As a joke, yeah. Did they do
maybe
it?
that's a bad joke still. But no, I was so surprised. We started walking through like different, the priest just happened to talk about Protestantism or some key differences, and there was just so much honor toward. He would always say our Protestant brothers and sisters. There was no negative talk, just stating differences,
Yeah.
still giving high honor to our fellow Christians.
Right.
You and I are known to dunk on him a little bit.
A little bit. But
Yeah.
It's good
No,
to be
that's
gracious.
But in a
good, though.
position of authority as like a priest.
Yes.
And the people leading the class, there was just nothing negative being said. Where my experience as a Protestant, as we talk about Catholics, it's like they're crazy buffoons.
You might as well have brought the occult, like brought a Ouija board into the sanctuary of your Protestant church. Yeah.
And I was just like, the Protestants are doing a horrible job of giving the same type of honor. I've granted, I mean, I just didn't have that one RCI experience, but other people, other Catholics talking about Protestantism, it's not a bashing.
Yeah. There's like a yearning for them to come to the fullness. And there's definitely some Catholics that'll bash Protestants. I mean, I've definitely been guilty of that. But for me, coming from it, there's been sort of that like anger of like what I didn't know. But I think what I experienced, and maybe you can speak to this as well, is in Protestantism there's a negative view of Catholicism based on false things they believed about what Catholics believe.
Yep.
Whereas in Catholicism, there's like this yearning for Protestants to come home, often based on the reality of what they actually believe that's different.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's an overgeneralization too. But what I've found, there's a lot of things like most of the laity that we've interacted with, and even the priests, they actually have a lot of respect for like, man, I wish that we all knew our Bibles as well as the Protestants did. And I wish that we did that. And I'm like, I kind of want to say, the Bible's ours. We got to reclaim it as our heritage. But then I'm like, wait, that's actually a beautiful way to look at it of like, they're doing something really well. And obviously there's some things that we wish they had. We wish they would come be one with us. But to look at someone that you disagree with and go, I respect and honor that you do this really well.
Yeah.
Even though we have our differences. And I'd invite you to come taste and see, as opposed to being like, those Protestants, they worship Luther.
Right.
I saw a statue of him in Switzerland. They worship him. You know, just like making up falsehoods, you know, and like propagating those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish. We've been talking about a lot of like what's best about Catholics versus Protestants, but I think that's why I say I'm not upset of my path because of everything that I taught. I even though I'm having some personal trouble finding my own rhythms again, reading the Bible, I know how to do it. I know what it looks like. I know a lot of scripture, and that's stuff that's never going to leave me, and that's been good for my soul.
And you've been trained really well in discipleship, which is something that like maybe the Catholic Church can grow in.
Yeah.
At least in certain areas. I know hasn't historically been a ton of like mentorship or discipleship happening in our parish, but people are wanting to restart that. So that's really a valuable experience too that you have.
And if a bunch of young adults are coming back to the faith, like
they're gonna want that.
they need that.
I cannot believe, total side note, we went to Mass today, and it's the first Sunday of Lent when we're recording this. Did you see how many young people were standing up when they were getting the catechumens?
Jealous.
I know. They're like, catechumens, stand up. And like all of the young people in the church go, stand up. And I'm like, where did you get all these people?
It was like maybe 20 catechumens?
Yeah, and they were all had to be like 25 to 35, right? Like,
there's a couple outliers. I think there's an older man.
There's
like,
but he,
good
for you.
Good on you.
Yeah.
But
so there's catechumens and then candidates? Are they different?
yeah, so I hope I
some-
don't mix them up. I believe a catechumen
That's confirmation.
is I think
It's both.
I think catechumen is when you're being received from 0 sacraments. So like
Okay.
that would be someone who's not a Christian in any sense.
Or at least hasn't been baptized.
Or at least hasn't
even
been
if they were
baptized. Yeah, they could have been like going to a Protestant church, but like if you've never been baptized in a valid sense that's received by the church, a catechumen would have to go through, as a requirement, would go through RCIA, and then they would go through the Lenten scrutinies, which they're going to do over the next couple of weeks, and then on Easter Vigil they would be baptized, confirmed, and communed all at once, baby. Like right on the resurrection, let's go. And then I think a candidate is someone who has a valid baptism that's never
Yes.
been confirmed. And that could be someone who was baptized as a Catholic and then just never chose to go through confirmation. Or like our friend Stephen is technically a candidate. We were candidates. We were received in confirmation.
Because we already had valid
Because we already had
baptism.
valid baptisms.
Okay.
Yeah. So even though they were Protestant, like I was baptized in the Baptist church. It was literally called Scottsdale Bible Church. It was like Baptist with a good
That's
website.
so cool.
to
I
a
didn't
T.
know it's like honored.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's
No,
really
I-
cool. Like, and it's kind of talk about like a subtle dunk on Protestantism. Protestants are like, baptism doesn't mean anything, man. It's just an outward profession of your inward faith. And Catholics are like, I know you think that, but you really had sanctifying grace wash over you when you were baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That was regenerative, and the Holy Spirit was given to you.
How cool.
Which is
like baptism is so cool.
yeah. Because like the guy dipping you was like, nothing. This is not regenerative, and God's like, oh yeah, you think so? Like
Yeah.
I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do.
What you do in my name matters.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and there's a long-standing patristic theology around that. Like if there were church fathers who, if you were baptized by what they called a heretic or a schismatic, which I mean, I guess in technical ecclesiastical language, you could call Protestants at least schismatics and maybe some of them heretics, but you shouldn't use that as like a, condemning thing. It's just a technicality. Almost every church father received the baptisms of the heretical sects that were in the proper form. And so that's why the church still does that, because it's like they might have been in schism from the church, but baptism is a sacrament. Like they were so careful about rebaptizing people and saying that the sacrament was invalid and saying that God's grace was invalid, because it's
Wow.
prevenient grace in baptism that's reaching out to you, right? And so there were a couple church fathers that were like, nah, we're not receiving them. But the whole church was like, no, we're going to receive the baptisms even from the heretics. Now, obviously, if it's like a Jehovah's Witness baptism, that's a little different because they confess some fundamental differences about the triune nature of God. Like they don't
Okay.
believe in that. So
Yeah.
that would be a rebaptism.
Hmm.
But I mean, they would just say their first baptism was invalid. But like our baptisms were in the Trinitarian formula. They were from people who professed the divinity of Christ and the Trinitarian nature of God, and that you had to come to faith in Christ for salvation. And
So how do they check that? Do they like Google that church?
yeah, so your faith directors, like your RCIA director and your priest, I think would be responsible for
Validating.
it. And
Usually you have to bring like a certificate of your
certificate,
baptism.
Okay.
Or I think even in ours they said like because I was baptized in a Methodist church, so I did have a certificate. But let's say that wasn't the case and I had been baptized in college, I probably could have asked the person who baptized me for a statement saying like when it
wow.
was, how they did it, and that it was in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Yes.
And as long as they thought that the letter was valid, they probably would have said, okay.
And the denominational affiliation matters, because like for Mormonism, for instance, they baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but they don't believe in the Trinity. And so like if you had a baptism certificate from an LDS church, they wouldn't receive
I
that.
see.
But they would know that from the denominational
Yeah.
affiliation. Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, that's kind of like, it's kind of like a subtle dunk. It's like, here, you guys thought everyone was just making these faith commitments, and God's out here saving people,
Yeah.
man. He's dunking them and washing them, and they are regenerated.
Right.
Which, yeah, that was because when, like what you talked about earlier of like, God's been with me the whole time. And then to even think that your baptism was regenerative, even if you didn't believe it was, but you believed, like you submitted to the form of it properly.
Yeah.
Like God did a miracle. He washed your sin away, and he put his spirit within you, regardless of you, and that's just,
Amen.
yeah, that's how grace works.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. That's my favorite because, yeah, although this parish, I like that even the candidates still are going through the full formation. Like for us, we went through like a 4-week class, got confirmed on a random Saturday mass in March 13th of 2020 or 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was surprised how long RCIA is.
It's like, what, 9
It's
months?
September through Easter.
And it used to be longer. Like
it used to
the
be
preparation
longer.
process used to be
They
longer.
used to baptize people naked too.
Yeah.
What?
Like super, super early church.
Okay.
There was some evidence that they would, because you're being born again in baptism,
Yeah.
there's some evidence that it was naked, which,
Crazy.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Different culture.
Different culture.
More okay with nudity, probably, and not sexualizing everything. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's going to be the part of the podcast that someone's going to be like, what? And comment on.
If they make it to
I shouldn't bring everything up that comes to my mind, I guess. But
Yeah.
yeah. Cool.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing your story. What do you feel like, do you feel like you have any words you want to leave people with, Like, let's say they're somewhere on the spectrum of your journey, which could be a lot of different places because
I
it
think it would be all over the
has
place.
taken a while to get to where you are. What do you feel like would be like words of encouragement for someone?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing I've learned within the last couple years through just a lot of trial and like hardship and life circumstance changing, like friendships different, like to never leave God behind. And I think no matter, I know that almost sounds really easier said than done. I've just learned that God is the only thing that is never gonna like fail me. He's promises to always be there, and that's so true. Like he's the only thing that can actually sustain me. Nothing else can sustain us in the fullest. It's always gonna pedal off. Because that's where we're going to get our source of life, our determination, our courage, and especially now that I know, like in the sacraments, it's like he wants to fulfill me in physical ways and spiritual ways, and mental and emotional, and he wants to be that. Because I've seen so many people deconstruct without God alongside them. I think it's God calls us to doubt. God calls us to deconstruct.
Sure.
But he has to do it with us. And so many people leave God out of it and try to figure it out on their own. And I think even I've taken some time away to give myself some space from the hyper-religious structures I've been a part of, but I always just ask God to be there with me. And I think he's just blessed that. It never happens in the time you want it to, or how you want it to, but...
I think that's a beautiful point, because that's kind of like a popular buzzword, right? Like there's like a whole Twitter trend of like deconstructing my faith, #deconstruction or whatever. I like what you said. Yeah, because there are walls that we build, sometimes even with God, that are helpful for a season. Or even just a part of your journey that maybe he's like, hey, this is helpful for this thing you're going to learn here, but this isn't ultimately everything I have for you. And if you come to that point where the floor falls out and you just tear down the whole building with no reconstruction plan, you're left out in the cold, shivering.
Yeah.
But yeah, if God is asking you to tear it down for the sake of building something new, he's probably building something more beautiful in its place, which is difficult, but that's a really good word.
Foundation. Don't be afraid to look into Catholicism.
That's the real treat.
I was afraid for so long.
There is a lot of fear about it. Yeah,
it's a big deal. It's a lot to commit to.
Yeah, and I mean, God is high challenge. Like, God wants us to be as amazing as he designed us to be. And so, of course, the ordinary way, the thing he's called us to as a structure, as a religion, as a covenant community, is going to be designed to lead us to that. Right? I think that was a big struggle. Like, Catholicism has a lot of rules and boundaries and structure. And it's like, but God wants us to be who he designed us to be. And you need all of that. You need that structure. You know, it's like why we tell our kids to brush their teeth and go to bed and make sure they eat their vegetables and go to school. Because without that structure, they don't become who we want them to be as parents. And it's the same way with God and us. And so, of course, Catholicism, of course, his body on earth is that way.
In a time when we can't discern truth easily, it takes more effort than it used to. It takes the guesswork out in some ways. Or it asks you to come on an adventure. To do it with God, of finding out why that truth has been passed down for so long, and uncover it with him. And that's the story that we're building.
it is ironic that in the time that all that information is the most available is also the time when there's like sort of like an attack on truth and information as a whole. Like the most available documentation of all the evidence of the existence
Ever.
of God and Catholicism ever is also the time when people are like, I don't trust anything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
get outside,
Yes.
experience nature.
Like
As
we
it's
are right
flowing
now with
wind
the
all
wind.
over us. Yeah, cool. Well,
Thank you for
Joshua,
having
thanks.
me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even
It's
know
been
where
a
run
pleasure.
time's at,
I have
but
no idea.
I think it'll be a good one.
Yeah.
And yeah, go look into Catholicism, people. And we'll see you next time. If you like this episode, thanks so much for watching and just for joining us as we hear Joshua's story. Share it with someone who you think would relate to part of his journey and they might find something good out of it. And if you like what you're seeing here, make sure to subscribe and keep up with all of our newest content. So we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.